Chapter 189. Sure enough, this was what all the spectators thought of at the same time. They knew that this evildoer was going crazy to the end. In the field, almost everyone had stood up. They were crazily shouting Lu Feng's name, constantly roaring, as if they were Lu Feng, wanting to carry on this incredible battle to the end. In a massacre abyss, it's not that there are no high-level warrior-level massacre gods. Although there aren't many, there are still some. Even the massacre emperors have a few of them. But their path forward has never been like Lu Feng's, completely paved with madness and hot-bloodedness. Regardless of victory or defeat, it's all for the sake of fighting. He simply doesn't care whether he can win or not, whether he can bear it. He only wants a battle that can transform himself. In his heart, whatever title, whatever glory, they're all fleeting clouds. This is a true warrior. We are not as good as him. Guang Ren Tinxing let out a long sigh, his fingers shaking slightly. At this moment, hearing Lu Feng's crazy voice and seeing the crazy audience, even he was infected to a certain extent, having an impulse to make a move. In the beginning, they had all walked up step by step from the massacre sons. But they had given up countless hot-bloodedness for the sake of titles, striving for stability, for the sake of superficial titles. Although they had become the massacre emperors, this was the greatest title for a young supremacy. But compared to Lu Fenglai, they were still lacking. Another batch of Sons of Slaughter appeared. This time, there were even more people, almost reaching the number of 200. Compared to the first batch, there were more than half of the previous batch. But for Lu Feng, who was gradually entering the most extreme state of quality, the results they achieved were still lacking compared to the first batch. One punch, one kick, one palm, one body. Lu Feng's movements had already begun to transcend, and gradually, a kind of vague consciousness of the realm began to appear. He was obviously standing there, but all the turbulence was entangled, causing all the essence to be restrained. This was the most primitive sign of the realm. Only a little bit more, just a little bit more, and he would step into the realm that only the true young supremes could comprehend. Finally, after many more wounds were left on their bodies, there was no son of slaughter left standing in the field. The atmosphere of the audience was pushed to the limit. At this moment, even the warriors' emotions were ignited by Lu Feng. They shouted loudly, their faces ferocious. At this moment, there were no longer any racial boundaries in the field. All the creatures were shouting Lu Feng's name. Next group, next group, next group, next group, next group. Countless voices were shouting, and there was even a hint of extreme madness in them. And Lu Feng, who was at the critical moment of enlightenment, did not disappoint them. Looking at the sky, he shouted, "Next group." This time, there were 300 Sons of Slaughter. Although Lu Feng's combat power was unparalleled, they understood that this was definitely the peak of the heaven of slaughter, or even the existence of the god of slaughter. However, Lu Feng's crazy attitude ignited the greatest madness in the hearts of all the Sons of Slaughter. None of them chose to retreat. To be able to become a Son of Slaughter, which one of them was not a crazy person who walked on the edge of slaughter. Facing such a heroic Lu Feng, they only had admiration and even crazier madness. The third group came up. Lu Feng's figure became more and more blurred, and his will became stronger and stronger. And there were very few who could leave scars on his body. The fourth group, the fifth group, the madness continued, and miracles continued. Fast. In fact, just standing there was the greatest speed. Slow. In fact, it was not moving, but everything was slow. The essence of everything was the embodiment of all kinds of essences. But what about the realm? What was the realm? In the past, Lu Feng did not understand. However, after experiencing these countless battles, Lu Feng had begun to understand vaguely. This time, it was his craziest battle. Although the opponents were not strong, Lu Feng had never been like today. Facing so many opponents, he evolved everything to his heart's content. Therefore, he was gradually comprehending. Realm? No, not much. Realm was realm. He was not anything. He was the collection of everything. Everything did not need to be manifested. He was the fusion of essence, the sublimation of essence. It was the strongest embodiment of essence in immobility. Realm. This is the realm. This is the realm I pursue. Finally, when the 727 sons of slaughter of the 10th group were all lying on the ground, Lu Feng succeeded. The quiet figure seemed to have merged with the essence of billions. Although it was motionless, it was an extreme movement. This was the realm. This was Lu Feng's realm. There was a solemn atmosphere between heaven and earth. Although they did not know what had happened, these people could see that the silent figure seemed to have entered another level. It was a level that people could no longer grasp, and even lost the qualifications to look up to. Realm. He succeeded. A miracle. This is a peerless monster. This is definitely a terrifying, peerless monster. Although I don't know what his other situation is. But just by relying on this madness, this heaven-defying comprehension, he is definitely qualified to attack the king of slaughter of the advanced warrior realm. At this moment, whether it was Demeng, Guang Ran Tianxing, or the silent dust, they all sank to the bottom. They looked at Lu Feng's back, full of a kind of speechless emotion. 10 essences, this is nothing. As long as one is willing to spend time, then even the advanced warrior realm can be comprehended one by one. Although it will waste too much time, it is still possible. But the realm, this is an existence that surpasses the essence. It is the strongest collection of essence. The advanced warrior comprehended the realm. This in itself is a heaven-defying act. This is the performance of a young supreme. He comprehended, and he comprehended the 10 realms. It is an existence that has comprehended all 10 realms. Heaven-defying, heaven-defying. What kind of terrifying comprehension does this require? In the face of all opponents, he does not care about any gains or losses, only for the final victory. What a pure martial artist. He actually succeeded. They stood quietly in the field, waiting for countless time. This time, the time was so long, but no one went to disturb Lu Feng, to let Lu Feng continue to fight. Because these spectators could feel that the human figure in the field was in the midst of a crazy transformation. A kind of violent will and power began to appear from Lu Feng's body, began to spread, and began to pervade the world. This was a kind of strange aura. It was obviously violent to the extreme, but if one carefully felt it, one would feel a kind of endless tranquility. This was a kind of contradictory collection, indescribable and indescribable. Gradually, Lu Feng's eyes, which had been closed since who knew when, slowly opened. The corners of his mouth carried an inexplicable smile. He glanced slightly, and then glanced at all the spectators in the whole field. At this moment, Lu Feng slowly opened his mouth, incomparably powerful, with a kind of king's aura that looked down on millions of creatures, the noblest eternal will. The Sky Massacre, is it possible? Up until now, only less than a day had passed. There were still 4 days before the end of the assessment, but Lu Feng said such a thing. This was simply a tyranny that ignored the existence of many existences. However, in the face of such tyranny, no one dared to refute. They could only stand there in a daze, not knowing what to say. Even those who did not know martial arts could see that the Lu Feng, just now, was definitely not his peak state. He was just condensing some kind of cultivation method. So he chose to besiege many sons of massacre. This kind of madness was beyond anyone's imagination. However, Lu Feng did it, and even succeeded. This kind of genius was an unimaginable fighting genius, a terrifying, peerless talent that no one could compare to. When Lu Feng said this, it meant that he had reached the realm of great success. In future battles, he would no longer hold back. In the face of Lu Feng's full strength, who dared to go against him? Time passed slowly, just when everyone thought that everything was going to end like this. A voice slowly rang out from the void. Then there was another voice, 2 voices, 3 voices. No. I don't agree. Defeat me. A total of 30 voices sounded, as if coming from the sky, landing clearly in the land of massacre. The moment they heard these voices, everyone turned their eyes to those who spoke. However, with a glance, The whole land of Massacre was boiling. It's the son of Massacre, ethereal walker from Massacre, star number 114. Legend has it that he already has the strength of the heaven of Massacre. However, for some reason, he is not advanced. I didn't expect that this battle would attract him. That's the Thai language of Massacre, star number 1055. He actually came too. It's D Tai Liloa. He also came. More than 30 of the most powerful sons of Massacre. Once they gather, their power is more terrifying than 1,000 or even a few thousand ordinary sons of Massacre. The 30 sons of Slaughter were the number one peerless existences on their respective Slaughter stars. They were all terrifying geniuses who had the potential to attack the heaven of Massacre or even the god of Massacre. However, for some reason, they had not taken the assessment. Now, when Lu Feng's terrifying deeds began to spread, these existences who only believed that they were invincible finally could not help but come. They floated in midair. Although they were all peak advanced warriors, the power they exuded was several times more terrifying than ordinary evolution stage warriors. These were the real, peerless figures among the sons of Massacre of the major races. Hearing their words, Lu Feng smiled. It was a strange smile, with a trace of blood and extreme madness. Just a glance was enough to make people tremble. It was difficult to describe the trembling in their hearts at this moment. Lu Feng slowly opened his mouth. Are you all going to deny my decision? Are you trying to challenge my authority? His voice was still so calm. However, in everyone's ears, they trembled with fear. Lu Feng was like the emperor of the 9 heavens, overlooking all living beings. His will was the will of the king, the majesty of the emperor, the glory of the emperor. His words were not to be questioned or denied. If not, it was the wrath of the emperor. When the emperor was angry, corpses would float for thousands of miles. When the emperor was angry, thousands of races would be exterminated. Feeling Lu Feng's incomparable will, everyone felt an unprecedented shock. At this moment, even the 3 perfect stage kings of Massacre who were hidden in the private room were similarly shocked. This was the biggest shock they had felt so far. It was an indescribable fear. At this moment, they were also suppressed by the same thing. Tianxing, you're wrong. He doesn't have the potential to become our opponent, but in the future, he will definitely become a terrifying obstacle to our limits. Regardless of whether he has other trump cards, just based on his performance today, he will definitely become the king of Massacre. If he has other trump cards, then he will most likely become the king of Massacre, the supreme existence among the kings of Massacre. No one denied Damon's words because the two of them had the same feeling. Chapter 190. The 30 sons of Slaughter in the sky were all incomparably noble existences in their respective regions. They were all supreme words. They believed, or perhaps publicly acknowledged, that they were already existences that belonged to the heaven of Slaughter. If it weren't for their own unexplainable reasons, then they would already be on the path to challenging the god of Slaughter. As such existences, their pride was naturally incomparable to anyone else's. However, at this moment, after hearing Lu Feng's 2 sentences, these people felt a kind of inner submission, and an impulse to worship was born in their hearts. This was simply an unforgivable shame for them. My goal has always been to become a true young supreme being, the Emperor of Slaughter. Now, how can I retreat because of a few words? Lu Feng. You are called Lu Feng. Since you are so, then there is nothing else to say, only battle. This son of Slaughter was recognized as one of the 3 most powerful sons of Slaughter. He had his own pride and his own strength. His current strength was already qualified to obtain the title of God of Slaughter. Therefore, he couldn't let himself retreat even half a step. If so, then his realm in this life would be the God of Slaughter. Therefore, he wanted to fight. Not only him, but the 30 sons of Slaughter who were able to come all had the same thoughts. Although many people didn't speak, their actions had already explained everything. Seeing this scene, Lu Feng laughed. It was a kind of endless crazy laughter. Standing in the endless square, facing the gazes of hundreds of millions of people, The majesty of an emperor was completely enraged at this moment. He didn't wait for the command to start the battle. Lu Feng's momentum finally began to completely boil. Physical strength, 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, the endless increase made countless people more and more flustered and tremble more and more. Finally, when the last moment arrived, Lu Feng's physical strength reached a terrifying level of 5 times. How is this possible? A high-level warrior has a 5 times increase. What kind of existence is he? How can he have such a terrifying physical body? Previously, the most powerful physical strength Lu Feng had revealed was 4 times. For a high-level warrior to have 4 times the physical strength was already unimaginable. However, when he thought about how the direct descendants of the Divine King's bloodline were able to increase their strength by 4 times when they were still advanced warriors, although he was surprised, it was far from the level of horror. But now, Lu Feng had actually shattered all the shackles and stepped into the level of a 5-fold increase in physical strength. This was simply unbelievable. My nether race is known for our flesh and blood. Our supreme nether body can shake the entire universe. As a direct descendant of the Nether King progenitor, I have been using all kinds of terrifying divine items since I was young. But even so, it was only when I became a martial artist that my physical body reached 5 times the standard. He's just a human. How could he have such a terrifying physical body? This is impossible. This is absolutely impossible. Surname Blue? Could it be that he is the descendant of the one who once dominated the universe, the one who was the #1 paragon in the universe since ancient times? Among the 3 emperors of massacre, the one who was the most shocked and frightened wasn't a Meng and Guang Ran Tianxing, but the emperor of the netherworld, Dust, who was known for his powerful physical body. As an existence with an invincible physical body, he understood the difficulty of improving the physical body. Generally, those who could reach 3 times the standard in the advanced warrior realm were already of the divine descendant bloodline and were already unparalleled. Those who could reach 4 times the standard were all direct descendants of the Divine King. But at this moment, Lu Feng had broken this shackle and promoted to 5 times the standard. This had already surpassed the limit of the Divine King's bloodline. The sky was silent. Many of the onlookers were stunned. Many of the Sons of Massacre were stunned. Previously, when Lu Feng's physical body reached 4 times the standard, it had already shocked these existences. At this moment, when he broke the shackle and reached 5 times the standard, they couldn't believe it and trembled all over. However, would it end with just a mere increase of 5 times in physical strength? No, not at all. Lu Feng had so many trump cards. Even Tu Tianxin had once said that Lu Feng absolutely had the qualifications to challenge the Divine King. Therefore, how could he possibly be so simple? Looking at the sky, Lu Feng was the emperor at this moment. When his majesty was challenged, the emperor was finally completely angry. Kill. Since the beginning of the assessment, Lu Feng had never made any shouts. But at this moment, when his majesty was challenged, the most honorable power finally bloomed completely. Facing the void, Lu Feng finally struck a blow. It was a blow that made the world lose its color and made time lose its light. 5 times the standard physical strength, using the exclusive technique, increased to 7 times. His physical strength had reached 35 times the standard, but this was still not enough. It was still not enough. Above the external essence, the power belonging to the realm burst forth. That was a power that surpassed the limit of 9 times the standard. It was a terrifying killing power that was infinitely magnified. This punch was resplendent, and the power of the enhancement had far exceeded 300 times the standard. At this moment, Lu Feng's killing power and Lu Feng's destructive power had exceeded 300,000 stars of destruction. 300,000 stars, that was already the standard of an intermediate upheaval stage martial artist. And Lu Feng's powerful blow had already reached a level that surpassed the current killing power by 2 levels. This punch was unparalleled. In an instant, Even the sky seemed to be collapsing. The entire world was dim, and time lost its light. Rumble, everyone sat on the spot in a daze. They stood on the spot and looked at the sky, having lost the ability to think. At this moment, the noisy sky had returned to tranquility again. It was an incomparably strange tranquility. In the entire sky, there was no longer any existence. Then the sound of people inhaling cold air continuously sounded. Everyone looked at Lu Feng with a different gaze. This was a kind of speechless horror, a kind of complete trembling. One punch to break the sky, shattering millions. 30 peerless sons of slaughter came with the belief that they would definitely win. They wanted to step on Lu Feng's corpse and walk to the altar. But the result was that there was no corpse left. They couldn't even make a move at the very least. They were killed in the void by Lu Feng's punch. This kind of battle prowess shocked the entire land of slaughter. Invincible. Invincible. This Lu Feng's strength is definitely not that of a son of slaughter. Even the heaven of massacre is not his limit. I'm afraid he has at least the power of the god of massacre, or even the power of the peak god of massacre. It's possible he definitely has the possibility to attack the Emperor of Massacre, the young Emperor realm recognized by billions of races in the universe. Such combat power was already recognized by the world. This battle was the first battle that made Lu Feng famous across the galaxy, and also the first battle where he burst forth his strongest voice. At this moment, only half a day had passed, but many existences understood that the remaining assessment no longer needed to be carried out. 30 sons of slaughter, this was nothing. But these more than 30 sons of slaughter were recognized as the sons of slaughter who had at least the strength of the heaven of massacre. Lu Feng annihilated all of them with just one punch. This was Lu Feng's strength. In the battle for the heaven of massacre, Lu Feng had already interpreted the concept of invincibility. Many existences knew that even if he wanted to attack the god of massacre at this moment, he had to pass completely, let alone a mere battle for the heaven of massacre. At this moment, Lu Feng was the emperor of this place. He looked down on all living creatures and was extremely noble. Who else wants to challenge me? His voice regained its indifference. But at this moment, in the hearts of many existences, there was a feeling of submission. No one made a sound, and no one dared to resist. At this moment, there were no more sons of slaughter going to the registration office. They were sons of slaughter who believed that they were the strongest and wanted to grow in the midst of massacre. But it didn't mean that they were idiots. Lu Feng's punch was already declaring the king's glory. How could the king's glory be blasphemed by anyone? There was only one outcome for those who resisted, and that was to be killed. Endless extermination, merciless extermination. There was no other possibility. Therefore, many existences no longer dared to deny it. Time passed slowly. In an hour, no one spoke, and the whole place was silent. In the private room, Damon sighed softly and said, "Although I don't know if this is his strongest strength, but now, in his current state, he is even qualified to attack the Emperor of Massacre. Although it's still impossible to succeed, but he already has the qualifications." Now, Lu Feng had just broken through. With one punch, he suppressed tens of thousands of sons of slaughter. His momentum had been raised to the peak. Any existence who came, even those stronger than Lu Feng, would be defeated by him. Okay, let's go. In a while, pay attention to Lu Feng. I think it won't be long before he challenges. The three emperors of slaughter understood that since Lu Feng had appeared in such a high-profile manner and performed such a shocking feat, they had no choice but to follow him. He didn't intend to endure it anymore. He was afraid that he would go crazy all the way and directly hit his limit. I really want to see his battle to attack the Emperor of Massacre now, although it's almost impossible for him. After one last look, Guangran Tianxing also left. His figure slowly dimmed and directly disappeared into nothingness. This was the use of the power of space. Legend had it that only after stepping into the divine realm could one use the power of space. But these warriors who were at the peak of the perfect stage had already done it. This indeed showed how terrifying these emperors of massacre were. The two disappeared, and now only the young sovereign of the netherworld race was left. He sat in the same place, looking at the center of the square, at Lu Feng, who was as noble as an emperor, and finally revealed a strange smile. He will fail to attack the Emperor of Massacre? Will he fail? Maybe it won't be long before we can really fight. Lu Feng, I'm looking forward to it. From the first day until sunset, no one else challenged Lu Feng. Although such a situation couldn't be said to be unprecedented, it had only happened 4 times in the past 100 years. And the creators of these 4 times were the current emperors of Massacre. They were the true apex geniuses among the billions of races in the universe. And now, Lu Feng was the 5th one. After more than 6 hours, no one challenged Lu Feng, which meant that he had passed the test, and he had finally become the true emperor of Massacre. When the empty voice announced Lu Feng's victory, the incomparable silence in the square was completely shattered. Countless roars sounded, overturning heaven and earth. Lu Feng's name was shouted and praised. In almost a few minutes, hundreds of massacre stars in the surroundings had already appeared Lu Feng's name. And everyone knew that in a few hours, the entire massacre abyss would know Lu Feng's name. Lu Feng left the massacre star. At this moment, a shadow appeared in front of him. When he saw the shadow, Lu Feng bowed slightly and called out respectfully, "Senior." When Lu Feng obtained the title of Emperor of Massacre, Slaughtering Sky God appeared. Chapter 191. Looking at Lu Feng, Tu Tianxin let out a long sigh and said, "Lu Feng, you're not bad. Not bad at all. I didn't expect that you'd actually use this battle of slaughter to temper yourself and finally raise your comprehension toward the martial Tao to the level of realm. Now, I'm afraid your name, Lu Feng, has already appeared on the desks of many experts from different clans, although it might just be a passing mention. However, this kind of treatment has already proven your worth." Lu Feng nodded gently. He knew that after this battle, he would be completely famous. Although the scope of this fame was only those massacre stars of level 3 or level 2, but he could be considered to have caused a sensation. Looking at Lu Feng, who had returned to silence, Tu Tianxin nodded gently and said, "Lu Feng, do you know why I didn't hide your appearance and ask you to fight with your real body?" Lu Feng shook his head slightly. He really didn't know. In fact, many people who enter the massacre abyss used various means to hide their identity, and even their appearance was completely changed. But I won't do that. I want you to appear with your original appearance. Do you still remember what I said to you when you went to the capital administrative star? Lu Feng's eyes lit up slightly. Lu Feng naturally still remembered the warning that Tu Tianxin once gave him. Those killings were completely bloody, but Lu Feng understood that that was the truth. That was the correct direction of the path of an expert. At this moment, he finally understood Tu Tianxin's plan. "Senior, I understand. I understand the meaning of you doing all this." Tu Tianxin, even if it was only a doppelganger that appeared at this moment, his strength was enough to shock the world. Lu Feng felt that this doppelganger had at least the strength of a peak divine god. Looking at the entire galaxy, this was definitely a peerless expert. It would be easy for such an existence to help him hide his identity, but Tu Tianxin didn't. This was something that Lu Feng had some doubts about. But now, after hearing Tu Tianxin's reminder, Lu Feng finally understood. The path of martial arts itself is to go against the heavens. Even the supreme divine king, although they comply with the heavens and earth, they ultimately have to strengthen themselves and transcend the shackles of the universe. Therefore, the path forward of a martial artist isn't boring cultivation, nor is it quiet seclusion. It's to fight and kill. This time around, I've revealed my true face and created a huge commotion. However, due to my level, I'm afraid that it's not enough to attract the attention of the other factions. However, if I were to really break through to the Massacre Emperor, I'm afraid that the powerful beings of the human race who are hostile to me would really make a move to kill me. This is incomparably dangerous. But what is this? Behind me is the Lu family, the #1 family in the universe that can cause a great deal of damage to a peak race. Behind me is Dao Songtian, the president of the Federal University, an overlord who dominates a part of the universe. I even have you behind me. Unless the almighty virtual king of those peak races personally takes action, it won't be that easy to kill me. This is a dangerous path. But isn't this also the path of a true expert? My future is to be the enemy of tens of thousands of people. Looking at the endless galaxy, even the peerless geniuses of the human race are my enemies. If I want to reach the peak of the divine, alter and surpass everything, then I have to step on their bones and ascend to my true supreme throne. They know of my existence, so they want to find trouble with me and fight against me. That's exactly what I want. Using them as my opponents will allow me to improve even faster. Lu Feng completely understood what Tu Tianxian meant. Only by reaching the level of being the enemy of tens of thousands of people could he truly experience the baptism of blood and killing. Otherwise, with his background, how many people would dare to challenge him and fight against him? Tu Tianxian looked at Lu Feng, who was burning with fighting spirit, and let out a hearty laugh. He nodded gently and praised, "Tens of thousands of people, tens of thousands of worlds, billions of stars, countless geniuses, all of them are my enemies. This is the most difficult path, but this is the only path. Since ancient times, which of the supreme divine king didn't ascend to the divine throne that illuminated the universe from endless killing? Those people rarely had any strong background or the bloodline of the divine king. Of course, this wasn't because of those shackles. It was because there were too many experts standing behind these people. Or, under their protection, these extreme geniuses could avoid a lot of fatal disasters and escape from desperate situations. But, at the same time, they lost the tempering of life and death. Even if they could amaze the current generation and quickly reach the peak of the Void Boundary King realm, or even the Quasi-King realm, they would have already lost the possibility of taking the final step. Lu Feng, it's good that you can understand all this. I'm very happy. Lu Feng didn't feel happy because of Tu Tianxian's praise. He was different from others, because his path was destined to be a path of killing. The great devil, true body, emphasized endless trials and tribulations. It emphasized breakthroughs in the trials of life and death. All of this required Lu Feng to reach the level of being the enemy of tens of thousands of people. Therefore, he didn't have any complaints about this choice. He only had a burning fighting spirit. All right, take a rest now. I will take you to the Grade 1 Massacre Star tomorrow. That will be when your real battle begins. Upon hearing this, Lu Feng nodded gently. For Lu Feng, this kind of battle wouldn't consume much of his energy. However, Lu Feng still planned to listen to Tu Tianxian's instructions and take a good rest. He wanted to face the upcoming challenge in his peak state. Tu Tianxian disappeared in an instant. At this moment, Lu Feng finally reacted. He had a bitter expression on his face as he muttered to himself, "But senior, where do you want me to rest without money?" After strolling around the streets for another day, Luo Yinyang once again raised his condition to the peak. Given Lu Feng's current physical condition, he wouldn't have any problems even if he didn't eat or drink for a few months, let alone just a few days without rest. However, this day of strolling didn't make Lu Feng feel relaxed, as Lu Feng had met many people. They weren't the sons of massacre. These people were the permanent liaisons of some races and forces on the Massacre Star. Their role was to recruit some amazing geniuses in advance when there was an appearance of them. Although they weren't from the same race, it wasn't a big deal in the current universe. For example, there were many peak powerhouses in the Human Federation. They weren't from the human race, but because of the human race's recruitment, they joined the human race's camp and became the human race's protectors. Lu Feng naturally wouldn't agree to such recruitment. Although the conditions they offer were tempting even to the Massacre Sky and the Massacre God, these weren't important to Lu Feng. When I reach the small success stage of the origin scripture, I can officially start cultivating the contents of the alchemy scripture. Once I can really comprehend it, I can refine elixirs. Then, the billions of races in the universe will treat me as a guest of honor. As long as I want to, any resources won't be a problem at all. Once he comprehended the contents of the alchemy scripture and could really refine elixirs, Lu Feng's status would rise tremendously. The number of people in the universe who could refine elixirs could be counted on one's fingers. Even with the human race's status as a peak overlord, the number of people who could refine elixirs had never reached 3 digits. As for Lu Feng, he directly learned the alchemy scripture. He was far from being comparable to those alchemists who used some ancient ruins to slowly comprehend the superficial knowledge. Lu Feng believed that once he could refine a legendary elixir, the entire Federation would serve him. Therefore, Lu Feng completely ignored these people's attempts to recruit him. Finally, the second day came. At noon on this day, 2 Tianshan appeared by Lu Feng's side on time. Seeing 2 Tianshan, Lu Feng didn't say anything. Under 2 Tianshan's lead, they instantly disappeared from this planet of massacre. Is this the place where the massacre sky stopped to challenge? Compared to those second-class massacre stars, this place is indeed very different. Looking at the more majestic and blood-red planet around him, Lu Feng took a deep breath. Under 2 Tianshan's lead, it only took a few moments for him to arrive on the huge massacre star. Generally, people who wanted to obtain the Son of Massacre would gather on the more than 8,000 third-class massacre stars. Those who wanted to obtain the massacre sky would all gather on the second-class massacre stars. The planet that Lu Feng had landed on previously was a second-class massacre star. However, regardless of whether it was a third-class or second-class massacre star, they were considered the outermost planets. Their existence was not a big deal at all. After all, the number of Sons of Slaughter was too many. However, it was different for the first-class massacre stars. In the entire dying galaxy, there were less than 200 first-class life planets. Among them, more than 100 were under the control of the gods and had become massacre stars. More than 100 massacre stars were only 1% of the first 2 types. After all, it was easy to obtain the Son of Massacre, but it was too difficult to obtain the Massacre Sky. The ratio of the Son of Massacre to the Massacre Sky was almost 1,000 to 1. Such a number was really shocking. Now, when Lu Feng arrived on this first-class massacre star, he felt the difference between the 2 types. Chapter 192. This was a difference in realms, not just the size of the planet. 2 Tianshan glanced at Lu Feng and said, "Lu Feng, what you have to do in these few days is to obtain the God of Massacre. I think this will increase the difficulty, but it's nothing for you." Lu Feng didn't try to be modest. He nodded his head gently. Since he wanted to become the God of Massacre, his current opponent would be the Heaven of Massacre. Although it was only an increase of 1 level, the difficulty increased by more than 1 level. Needless to say, the ratio of 1,000 to 1 Son of Massacre was enough to explain everything. Obtaining the God of Massacre is different from obtaining the Heaven of Massacre. If you want to advance, then you need to challenge 10 Heaven of Massacre in a row and win. In other words, if you want to become the God of Massacre, then you need to win 10 battles in a row in the same realm. If you fail once, then you have to start all over again. Of course, if you're not careful, I'm afraid you won't have the chance to start all over again. Lu Feng nodded gently, but deep down, he didn't care too much about it. This was not because he was arrogant, but because he was confident in his own strength. Previously, in the land of Massacre, he killed 30 Sons of Massacre with 1 punch. Almost all of these 30 Sons of Massacre had the strength of the Heaven of Massacre. At that time, Lu Feng not only did not use any trump cards, but he also did not exert his own strength to the extreme. Of course, the main reason for all this was that none of the Sons of Massacre had comprehended the existence of quality. They had never stepped into the realm of martial arts and were not recognized by the origin of martial arts. Therefore, Lu Feng relied on realm and could almost exert more than 10 times the combat power. This kind of increase was absolutely unbearable for the Sons of Massacre, who were only 30 to 50 times the combat power. Looking at Lu Feng's disapproving expression, Tu Tianxin did not care. Or if one was too arrogant, there would be a danger of capsizing. However, this kind of thing would never happen to Lu Feng, who had seen a giant elephant fight an ant and lose because the giant elephant underestimated the enemy. An ant would be an ant in the end. Even if he exhausted all methods, he would still be unable to fight against a giant elephant. The source of Lu Feng's confidence, pride, and everything else was because of his most powerful strength. However, Tu Tianxin still opened his mouth to remind him. Lu Feng, after experiencing the battle for the Sky of Massacre, you should understand. There were many hidden existences among the Sons of Slaughter. They definitely had the strength of the Heaven of Slaughter. It was the same for the competition for the God of Massacre. Those who could come here were at least geniuses at the Federation level. Their strength was abnormally strong, and their trump cards were also endless. It's not a big deal for a few Massacre Heavens with the power of the Massacre God to appear here. Being able to become the God of Massacre means that they have stepped into the realm of martial arts and have been recognized by the origin of martial arts. Even though you've already comprehended the realm, you're still acknowledged by the martial Tao's origin, so you're unable to unleash 10 times your battle prowess. Compared to them, you only have an increase of 2 times at most. So, you have to be careful. Lu Feng nodded his head gently and didn't say anything else. Back when he was comprehending quality, he had already understood all of this. Facing those geniuses who hadn't stepped into the realm of martial arts, it was completely easy to crush them. However, once the opponent also comprehended the substance, then they would be recognized and protected by the martial Tao's origin. In this case, Lu Feng's advantage would instantly weaken a lot. During a battle, relying on the existence of the realm, he could only unleash 2 times his battle prowess. After his final warning, Tu Tianxin disappeared once again. This time, Lu Feng, who had previous experience, walked directly to the Massacre lands. The number of slaughter lands here was much fewer than those on Grade 2 slaughter stars. However, in terms of scale, it was much larger. Lu Feng walked into a Massacre land and went directly to the counter. Looking at the young lady from the War God race in front of him, Lu Feng revealed a kind smile. In comparison, the War God race from the Milky Way had always been on good terms with the human race. In terms of appearance, the War God race was very similar to the human race. There was almost no difference. Therefore, the relationship between the two races was quite good. When the young lady saw Lu Feng's arrival, she also gave a professional smile and asked, "Sir, do you need any help?" Her attitude was much better than those on the level 2 Massacre stars. Actually, this was something that should be done. Killers who could be on the level 1 Massacre stars were all existences of the Massacre God. In terms of numbers, they were much, much less. And those who could come here to watch the Massacre battle were definitely influential people. Therefore, the service quality here was much better than the previous 2 places. Hearing the young lady's question, Lu Feng said, "It's like this. I want to participate in the Massacre God's test." After hearing this, the young lady nodded gently and subconsciously picked up the form. However, at this moment, she suddenly stopped all her actions and raised her head abruptly. She looked at Lu Feng in disbelief and stuttered as she asked, "You said you want to participate in the Massacre God's test?" This voice attracted the attention of countless people in the hall. They didn't make a racket like they did on the level 2 Massacre stars. However, their expressions were all filled with astonishment. Seeing this, Lu Feng didn't have much of a reaction. Lu Feng didn't have any ill feelings towards this young lady from the War God race. Hearing this question, Lu Feng didn't get angry. He only smiled and nodded. This time, the young lady from the War God race finally felt that she had lost her composure. She hurriedly apologized to Lu Feng and took out a form and a device from the counter. "This Massacre God, please enter your identity crystal card here and fill in your information while you're at it. If your qualifications are confirmed, our Massacre Abyss will arrange a battle for you as soon as possible." Hearing this, Lu Feng handed over the crystal card he had obtained earlier and started to fill in his information. The young lady inserted the crystal card into the device. Soon, The device's indicator light lit up. This meant that Lu Feng's qualifications were confirmed. Seeing this, the young lady didn't question Lu Feng anymore. After receiving the information that Lu Feng had filled in, she turned on the device and started to contact the Massacre Center's management organization. Just as Lu Feng was getting impatient, a voice sounded in the hall again. Massacre God. Lu Feng challenges the High Warrior Realm Massacre God. Qualification confirmed. The time will officially start at noon. The voice echoed twice. The effect was the same as before, causing quite a stir. At this time, the young lady took out a list. There were many names and levels written on it. Apart from that, there was nothing else. Looking at the thick information form, Lu Feng revealed a trace of doubt. Seeing this, the young lady from the War God race knew that it seemed to be Lu Feng's first time here. A trace of strangeness appeared in her eyes. After all, even those young sovereigns who had become emperors didn't directly issue a challenge the first time they came here. However, with her responsibility, the young lady still explained to Lu Feng at ease. The Massacre God Challenge is different from the Massacre God Challenge. Here, as long as you defeat 10 Massacre Gods in a row, you can advance. However, there's also a time limit. 10 battles are required to be completed within 10 days. If you fail or exceed the time limit, then it will be considered failure. In addition, the names on this information are the Massacre Gods on this planet. You can choose 10 opponents from them. After receiving your challenge, they will appear to battle with you. Hearing this explanation, Lu Feng understood. He nodded his head lightly. He picked up the form. Generally speaking, the Massacre Gods who challenged the Massacre God would directly choose the Massacre Gods who were ranked at the bottom in order to strive for stability. Of course, there were also some confident Massacre Gods who would choose those who were ranked at the top. When Lu Feng received the information, he didn't even flip through it. He directly pointed to the 10 names at the front and said, "It's these 10 people." In an instant, the young lady was stunned once again. She looked at Lu Feng with an expression full of disbelief. In her heart, even if Lu Feng directly disregarded his dignity and chose the last 10 people, it was far from being as shocking as choosing these 10 people. This was because these 10 people were the Massacre Heavens, who were currently ranked in the top 10 on the Massacre Star. One must know that they were in the top 10. In the entire Massacre Abyss, the number of Grade 1 Massacre Stars was less than 100. And the Massacre Abyss gathered a small portion of the universe's geniuses and monsters. Geniuses who could make it to the Massacre Gods here were the pinnacle existences in their respective races. And those who could make it to the top 10 of a planet could be said to be the treasures of their race. At this moment, these 10 people weren't the strongest 10 people on this Massacre planet, but they were the strongest people who stayed here. If such geniuses were placed in the outside world, they would definitely be the Overlord geniuses of a galaxy. However, at this moment, Lu Feng directly wanted to challenge all of them. This couldn't help but be horrified. After confirming with Lu Feng again, the young lady finally entered the name list when Lu Feng was slightly impatient. At this moment, the voice of the announcement sounded again. The name list of the 10 people was finally confirmed. The moment the name list was heard, the entire Massacre planet was in an uproar. Who is this? He's so domineering that he wants to challenge all 10 of them. These 10 people are currently the 10 most powerful Slaughter Heavens. Legend has it that they are qualified to enter the Massacre God. Among all the Massacre Gods, almost all of them can enter the top 1,000. Is challenging the Massacre God an affirmation of his own strength, or is he an idiot? Does he still want to advance or not? Lu Feng, who had experienced this once, naturally didn't care about these discussions. It was now morning. There were less than 3 hours before the battle would start at noon. And 3 hours later, Lu Feng didn't want to go out and wander around. He simply sat in the reception room and waited for the battle to start. Just as Lu Feng waited for 3 hours, this Massacre planet welcomed many guests. They all got the news that Lu Feng wanted to challenge the Massacre God through their own channels. The challenge of the Massacre God seemed to be much simpler than the challenge of the Massacre God. But in fact, it wasn't. The difference in strength among the Sons of Massacre was too great. and the real geniuses disdained to hinder the progress of others. They would only advance more crazily and overlook all living beings from a high place. Therefore, although the challenge of the massacre god seemed to be the most difficult, but when it came to the real test, it wasn't that scary. But the test of the massacre god was different. What was the massacre god? That was already a demon-level combat power. Generally, in a realm, there were only a few massacre emperors. Just like the human race, which dominated 40% of the Milky Way's territory and was the top Overlord race in the entire universe, there were only 7 young Supremes in the race. And among these 7, only 3 of them became massacre emperors. The other 3 were still gods of massacre. It could be seen how terrifying the massacre god was. Not only that, in terms of strength, the gap between the massacre god and the massacre god wasn't very big. Challenging an opponent of the same level was nothing. But to challenge 10 Supremes consecutively in 10 days, and not even one failure was allowed. This was very scary. And compared to the test of the massacre god, the test of the massacre god was obviously more interesting. Therefore, after the spectators and spies of the major forces on the surrounding first-class massacre stars got the news, they quickly gathered. This momentum had no intention of stopping. More and more people began to gather. They all hoped to witness the arrival of an ultimate confrontation. Chapter 193. Finally, it was time. A receptionist found Lu Feng and led him to the vast land of massacre. Compared to the land of massacre used in the massacre sky exam, this place was obviously much, much bigger. Standing on the endless square, Lu Feng felt an oppressive force spreading. This wasn't the majesty given to him by some powerful existence, but the terrifying willpower naturally emitted by this ancient place. A peak massacre god is already a demon-level existence. A demon-level existence is considered the most precious existence in a peak overlord race. In an era, the number of demon-level existences that can appear is definitely limited. Even in the golden era of the human race, there has never been someone above 100 people. Lu Feng had already heard about it from Dao Song Tian. In this year's Federal University, there were only 3 true demon-level existences, although the outside world said that there wasn't a single one, and the strongest was only a peerless genius of the Federation level. However, Dao Song Tian told Lu Feng that the Federal University had discovered and nurtured 3 demon-level existences. However, these 3 were already nurtured by the Federal University with everything they had. The Federal University was the cradle of all geniuses in the Federation. Even heavenly goddess Jialan came from here. However, such a super university that was famous throughout the entire universe only had 3 demon-level existences. One could imagine how rare demon-level existences were. Every demon-level existence is an incomparably heaven-defying existence. Their combat power is unimaginable. Their willpower is even immortal. And here, who knows how many demon-level existences have died. Among them, there are high-level warriors, evolution phase warriors, upheaval phase warriors, and even perfect phase warriors. Countless years of accumulation caused these demon-level existences to be passed down eternally, even though they died. Their willpower in this land of massacre is eternal. Rather than calling this a land of massacre, it's better to call it a burial ground for demon-level existences. There might be some peerless geniuses at the level of heaven-defying galaxies who could achieve the heaven of slaughter. But to be able to become the massacre god, without exception, they were all monsters. Those who dared to challenge the title of the god of massacre were undoubtedly those who had absolute confidence in themselves. They were all worthy of being called terrifying existences. They were the top geniuses in the entire universe. Lu Feng stood quietly in the center of the field, feeling the powerful will that had not dissipated for a long time. He was silent for a moment. The surrounding spectators were all people of high status. Naturally, they would not shout and shout like those ordinary people in the sky of massacre test. Lu Feng didn't say anything. The battle hadn't started yet, so naturally, everyone watched quietly. After a long time, a figure slowly walked out from the corridor. At this moment, countless wills were sinking and millions of auras were being stirred up by him. This was an advanced warrior, a pinnacle advanced warrior. However, the strength he displayed was something that even a venerable cultivator could not compare to. Moreover, his will possessed a terrifying power that could surpass the 9 heavens. The Massacre Sky's Lanlu E, an extreme genius ranked 127th in the Massacre Sky. As a spectator on the viewing platform announced the identity of the person who had come, the entire field fell silent. Although not all the geniuses of the entire universe had gathered in the Massacre Abyss, it included a small portion of them. To be able to rank 127th in a Massacre Sky, there was no need to mention how powerful Lanlu Lui was. The number of martialists that have fallen at his hands is no less than 100. His strength is simply unimaginable by ordinary people. As a member of the Battle God Tribe's royal bloodline, I never expected that such a noble existence would actually be the first to appear. In the minds of these spectators, Lanlu, he should be one of the last few people to appear. Among the top 10 people that Lu Feng had selected, Lanlu Yi was definitely in the top 3. However, they had never expected that such an existence, who could be considered the finale, would actually be the first to appear. This caused a slight commotion in the originally quiet area. One step after another. Every step was the condensation of an astonishing will. When he took the last step, his aura was already out of control. The terrifying power rushed straight to the sky, causing many of the spectating martialists to feel a deep sense of crisis. On the viewing platform, there were still 3 figures. The 3 perfect stage Massacre Emperors. Demeng looked at the indifferent Guanran Tianxing beside him and said playfully, "Tianxing, I never expected that the first person to appear would actually be your cousin. I'm afraid this was your idea." Upon hearing this, Guanran Tianxing shook his head gently. He said, "Actually, I wanted Louis to be the last one to go on stage. You all should have seen Lu Feng's battle back then. This terrifying existence is at least a monstrous existence. Based on that crazy performance, I'm afraid he has the qualifications to become the Massacre Emperor. If he really does have a trump card, then he must be a peerless monster. He must be the Emperor of Slaughter. Against such an opponent, how can I let my cousin fight at his peak? I think this should be Lu Yi's own decision." Demeng was slightly taken aback, but he quickly understood. He looked at Lanlu Lu, who was not holding back in the slightest and had already raised himself to his peak state, and a look of approval appeared on his face. As expected of the royal bloodline. Although his aptitude is not that terrifying, his heart is an invincible existence. He doesn't want to take any advantage. He wants to rely on his own strength to defeat Lu Feng at his peak state. In the future, there will definitely be a place for him among the top powerhouses of the War God clan. Guanran Tianxing disagreed with Demeng's words. He was naturally aware of his cousin's strength, although Lanlu Lu's ranking was only 137th. However, his true strength had long surpassed all of this. He had long possessed the strength of the Massacre God. If he hadn't wanted to directly reach the peak state of the Massacre God and shock the world with a single brilliant feat, why would he have been so patient? This time, when he heard his cousin praise Lu Feng, he finally couldn't hold it in any longer. "Actually, I really want to see what he looks like when he unleashes his full strength." Demeng nodded his head gently. He said, "Indeed, I also want to see what Lu Feng's trump card is. Now that your cousin, who has the royal bloodline of the War God clan, is making a move, we should be able to find out a little." Guanran Tianxing didn't take Demeng's words to heart. Demeng didn't hear him. After saying that he really wanted to, he said that he really wanted to War God clan, Lanlu Lu. Lanlu Lui stood quietly in front of Lu Feng with a shocking aura and introduced himself succinctly. However, Lu Feng didn't respond to his introduction at all. His eyes were still shut quietly, as if he was in a deep sleep. Lanlu Lu frowned slightly when he saw this, but didn't say anything. The first challenger, War God clan, Lanlu Lu. "Let the match begin." As the voice in the void said this, the battle began. Lan Lu's willpower was condensed to the extreme. As soon as he said this, he was about to use his strongest power that could shake everything. However, just as he was about to make a move, he suddenly stopped in his tracks. He frowned slightly as he looked at Lu Feng, who was still silent and calm. "What do you mean by this?" Lan Lu asked. He looked at the motionless Lu Feng and didn't understand what was going on. However, Lu Feng, whose eyes were tightly shut, did not respond to his words. It was as if he was really resting. The entire massacre abyss was silent. Then, a slight hubbub started to appear. Even the 3 massacre emperors on the spectator stand were the same. They frowned slightly and looked at Lu Feng in confusion. What is Lu Feng trying to do? Is he going to give up? That's impossible. Nobody understood what he was trying to do. Soon, some people started to get impatient and started to urge Luo Yunyang. However, Lan Lui didn't seem to hear the urging of these people. He just looked at Lu Feng quietly. He had heard from his cousin, the new massacre emperor, Guang Ran Tianxing, that Lu Feng was a terrifying demon who had the qualifications to become the massacre emperor. Lan Lu, who had never revealed his true strength, was finally tempted. He was currently ranked 137th. However, he knew very well that once he unleashed his true combat strength, he would definitely be able to rush into the top 10. In the entire land of massacre, in the massacre sky, there were far too few people who could truly make him feel the urge to fight. Therefore, after hearing his cousin's words, Lan Lu finally decided not to hide his greatest strength. He wanted to directly challenge the position of the massacre god after defeating Lu Feng. However, Lu Feng's current state made him feel uncomfortable. He wanted to defeat Lu Feng, but not in a situation where Lu Feng didn't put up any defense. Therefore, he was willing to wait before Lu Feng woke up. 10 days. I am willing to wait. Everyone was watching Lu Feng quietly. Those who could enter the massacre abyss were all powerhouses. To them, 10 days was naturally nothing. Looking at Lan Lu's appearance, he seemed to be waiting for Lu Feng to wake up by himself. If Lan Lu could afford to wait, then so could the rest. I like to see what exactly this Lu Feng wants to do. 10 days. If he is still like this in 10 days, then he will be judged to have failed. At that time, if he wants to apply for the second test, he will have to wait a few years. The test of the massacre abyss had to be completed within 10 days. You could complete it on the first day or the last day. However, you had to complete it within 10 days. If you failed the test, then the massacre abyss would give you a chance to take the next test based on your performance. However, if Lu Feng failed because of this reason, then even if he was given a second chance to take the test, he would have to wait for who knows how many years later. Everyone was waiting quietly. However, they couldn't understand the battle that was going on at the moment. Although Lu Feng was standing quietly in the arena, his heart was in a battle. He was fighting an endless battle. However, this time, his opponent wasn't those powerhouses, but his own willpower. In a massacre abyss, too many exceptional geniuses and evildoers had died. They had all been incomparably noble existences when they had been alive. Even after death, their willpower still existed eternally and was immortal. The willpower of the peak perfect stage martialists had undergone a qualitative upgrade. Chapter 194. Lu Feng's will had always been lawless. Even the existence of billions of gods couldn't suppress him. His nobility originated from his fate, which was bestowed by fate. This nobility was incomparable to anything else. He was an emperor, the supreme king of all living things. However, in this place he was suppressed. He was suppressed by the remnant wills of the dead. How could Lu Feng tolerate this? How could he allow others to suppress his king's glory? Lu Feng, maybe a king who hasn't reached adulthood yet, a weak king who hasn't reached his peak, but I am still a king. Nothing can suppress me. The king's glory was recovering and becoming greater. Regardless of whether it was the human monarch bloodline in his veins or the nobility of his fate, he couldn't bear it passively. Therefore, Lu Feng was fighting. He wanted to use his own will to defeat all wills. He wanted to make these indestructible wills submit to him. 6 figures stood quietly in the endless void chaos. Countless nomological laws flickered, time and space rotated, and time was annihilated. All sorts of shocking phenomena lingered behind these 6 existences. They stood quietly like endless black holes that devoured everything and made the sun and moon lose their light. These 6 existences were all truly terrifying extreme-grade powerhouses. They gazed quietly into the distance, as if they could see everything clearly. After a long time, one of them finally let out a long sigh and said slowly, "Your Majesty, this disciple of yours is indeed terrifying. I believe that even if he doesn't have any trump cards, he would still be able to be titled the Emperor of Massacre. This was an ancient and desolate powerhouse." Even his voice sounded desolate. However, at the moment, he had a slightly respectful look on his face as he looked at the slightly chaotic and illusory existence in front of him. Upon hearing this, the chaotic and illusory figure laughed heartily. His laughter was so terrifying that it was enough to shatter a piece of the starry sky and shatter billions of stars. He didn't look at the 5 terrifying powerhouses behind him. Instead, his gaze was fixed on the endless void. Finally, after hearing this powerhouse's words, he laughed arrogantly and said slowly, "My disciple will definitely be the most dazzling king in the universe. Perhaps his strength is far from being comparable to yours. However, his future is something that you will never be able to catch up to." The one who spoke was the existence hidden in the endless illusions. It was Tu Tianxin. He had never left. He had always been paying attention to Lu Feng. However, the place where he hid was in the endless space-time. As for the 5 terrifying experts beside him, their identities were equally terrifying. They were the arbiters, the administrators of the massacre abyss. They were also the arbiters, the masters of the massacre abyss. Any expert that appeared in the universe was strong enough to dominate an area. They were like the supreme beings of the heavens. However, after hearing Tu Tianxin's words, no one dared to show any signs of resistance. His Majesty's disciple is naturally an existence whose name shakes the galaxy. I just don't know what Senior's identity is. At this moment, the arbitrators were also interested in Lu Feng. Of course, if it was in the past, they would not have gone to watch a battle between the god of massacre. To them, perhaps only the battle of the Massacre Emperor was worthy of their attention. However, things were different now. Not for anything else, but because this human youth called Lu Feng had a master, a terrifying master that made them tremble in fear. Although the existence of this virtual figure had not made a move, the will and majesty he exuded were extremely extreme. They had only felt such a powerful force from the ancient arbiters. Of course, if that was all, they would not have been so respectful. What really frightened them was that this terrifying virtual figure, which was comparable to the ancient arbiters, was actually just a clone. It was hard for them to imagine what kind of terrifying existence this self-proclaimed heaven-slaughtering god would be once his true body descended. I'm afraid that his real body already possesses a strength comparable to the ancient arbiters, who are in deep slumber and whose existence is unknown. This was the common thought of the 5 arbitrators at the moment. Originally, they had only looked at Lu Feng out of respect for Tu Tianxin. However, when they saw Lu Feng this time, they did not dare to think that way anymore. The shocking will exuded from Lu Feng's body. The noble will of an emperor who was a subject regardless of the billions of space-times made them finally start to see Lu Feng in a new light. Although they felt a little uncomfortable when they heard Tu Tianxin's words. However, these people understood that the Lu Feng in front of them might really have the possibility of surpassing them. Tu Tianxin did not look back or even pay attention to these people, but he had already guessed their thoughts. After the crazy laughter subsided, he smiled gently and said, "You will probably know his identity soon. I can feel that you don't seem to believe my words. Then, let's continue watching. I see that he is going to transform again. He has finally decided not to hold back anymore. He is no longer holding back his peerless brilliance. Lu Feng, do you understand now? Just as you said, only endless battles, only the way you said, is the true path of a king. Therefore, you have finally decided not to hold back anymore. Lan Lu Lu faced Lu Feng quietly and did not move. However, he gradually felt it. He felt the aura that was slowly emerging from Lu Feng's body. It was an indescribable will. Although it was extremely small, its existence was incomparably noble, as if it was even nobler than his own bloodline. This was undoubtedly inconceivable. After all, his bloodline was the ancestral bloodline of the War God clan. The ancestral War God clan's ancestral War Divine King was an invincible existence even among the Divine Kings. In his later generations, the existence of the Divine King kept emerging. Not only did this bloodline not die out, but also became purer and more terrifying. However, in Lan Lu Lu's perception, he actually could not compare to Lu Feng. This piqued his interest even more. A day's time passed very quickly. By the end of the day, the existence of the will within Lu Feng's body had already started to become very obvious. It wasn't just Lan Lu Lu, who was quietly waiting beside him. Many of the powerhouses on the viewing platform had also sensed it. It was precisely because they had sensed the nobility within Lu Feng's body that they were interested in continuing to watch. This Lu Feng is really terrifying. The nobility within his body is really a little unimaginable. Even I can feel a terrifying suppression. Although my ancestral war god was not the divine king, he was already a quasi-monarch existence. However, I am actually suppressed in front of him. This is really inconceivable. Damon had already sensed Lu Feng's nobility when Lu Feng had gone crazy the previous day. Although Lu Feng was still very weak, his nobility could not be concealed. When they heard Damon's words, Guangran, Tianxing, and Dust nodded their heads gently. As the inheritors of the Divine King's bloodline, they understood how terrifying Lu Feng's bloodline was. The next day, Lu Feng still did not move. However, that terrifying aura had already become even more intense. Most of the people on the viewing platform had already sensed it. On the third and fourth days, the aura continued to increase. And when the fifth day appeared, these people could no longer feel it. At this moment, Lan Lu Lui, who was closest to Lu Feng, no longer had a playful expression on his face. What appeared on his face was a kind of horror that couldn't be concealed no matter what. This was because Lan Lu Lui felt an impulse to submit to this aura, pressure, and nobility. This was a submission that originated from his soul, which made his body want to do the same thing at all times. On the sixth day, Lan Lu Lu started to be unable to resist anymore. Suddenly, he made a move. He retreated. He retreated before the battle even started. He hadn't started a fight with Lu Feng yet, but he had already retreated first. Such a scene was something that Lan Lu Lui would never have imagined before the battle. On the seventh day, many ordinary powerhouses on the viewing platform had already stood up. They had also sensed this nobility and aura which had affected them. On the eighth day, the aura was so strong that many powerhouses started to look solemn. Although this grandeur only suppressed them slightly, it still made them feel a little uncomfortable. However, what was Lu Feng's cultivation base? He had actually started to suppress them. On the ninth day, many ordinary spectators started to breathe heavily. Lan Lu Lu, who had left the battlefield, had an extremely ugly expression on his face. It was already impossible for him to make a move now, because he sensed that he couldn't even resist under the might of the extreme Dao realm. All the land under the heavens belongs to the king, and all the people on the shores of the land are the king's subjects. Is this the legendary king's will? What kind of cultivation base is he? How could he have such a noble will? Lan Lu Lu could not believe it. However, he could not do anything about what was happening in front of him. Finally, almost everyone on the viewing platform had stood up. They looked at the figure that had been wrapped in an endless, illusory storm, feeling extremely strange. Many powerhouses felt humiliated to be suppressed by the grandeur of a weak existence. They looked at Lu Feng and finally revealed a look of disdain. No matter how strong you are, no matter how talented you are, what's the use? It will be here in one more day. When the time comes, even if you are really incomparably noble, what can you do? The 10th day had finally arrived. This was the last day. According to the rules, one had to challenge 10 selected opponents in 10 days. Only by winning all 10 would one be able to advance. However, Lu Feng had not even defeated his first opponent. Although he had a terrifying will that made countless powerhouses feel somewhat oppressed, they knew that this was a fact. Moreover, this kind of grandeur could not represent one's strength at all. In the legends, the ancestors of the human race were the greatest sages of the human race in the distant space-time, the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors. They were born with great wills recognized by the universe. Even a real king would be suppressed when he saw them. However, they did not have the slightest strength. Any beginner warrior could easily kill them. If not for this, why would the human race be silent for countless years after the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors? Only when the number 1 divine king appeared did the human race finally set foot in the universe. No matter how strong the grandeur is only grandeur. In front of a powerhouse, what's the use of such a thing? Damon sneered. Although Lu Feng's grandeur and nobility made him feel a little oppressed, it did not affect his strength. If he wanted to, even if Lu Feng's grandeur was magnified 100 times, he would not be a match for him with a casual wave of his hand. Chapter 195. It was now 7 o'clock in the morning. There were only 5 hours left before the deadline. It was almost impossible to complete a clash with 10 opponents in such a short amount of time, or even win. Furthermore, Lu Feng didn't seem like he wanted to wake up. Everyone was still waiting patiently. For those onlookers, even if there wasn't any clash, being able to see Lu Feng's crazily rising aura was already a worthwhile trip. 8 o'clock. Lu Feng didn't wake up, but his aura had already started to become incomparably violent. That incomparably noble will gave off a feeling that it was above the 9 heavens. Finally, it was time. When it was about 10 o'clock, Lu Feng woke up. If I am the king of heaven and earth, there will be no king for all eternity. Lu Feng's voice spread throughout the entire venue. Everyone heard this terrifying declaration. Even the quasi-kings didn't dare to utter such words. They should have mocked him, but because of Lu Feng's nobility that surpassed everything, they chose to remain silent. Every time they thought of mocking him, this nobility would appear in their minds, making them only have a kind of subservience in their hearts. Lu Feng had woken up. His eyes slowly opened. At this moment, his endless bloodline started to boil. Being summoned by Lu Feng's strongest king will, Lu Feng's bloodline actually started to boil on its own. Boundless turbulence appeared around him. These turbulence, which had been triggered by Lu Feng's will, now surged even more crazily because of the awakening of Lu Feng's bloodline. The king had woken up. That's right, this is the bloodline power of that existence. Behind Lu Feng, after his bloodline was completely awakened, a shocking vision appeared. It seemed to have crossed the river of time and space and directly descended to the other side of the world. Every divine king had a different vision. For example, the divine king of the Yellow Springs, his martial path incarnation was the Yellow Springs Monument. If the divine king of the Yellow Springs had descendants, then once his descendants used the power of their bloodline, an incarnation of the divine king of the Yellow Springs would naturally appear behind them. Although they had their own martial path incarnations, the incarnation triggered by the bloodline was different from the martial path incarnation. Everyone knew about the incarnation behind Lu Feng. They had seen it countless times in the ancient records of their own race. Regarding this figure, all the major races, regardless of whether they were first-rate races, weak races, or peak overlords, only had one sentence to describe it, and it was the same sentence. That was the King of Kings since of time. This was the king of the divine king of humans. That was an invincible overlord with the title of human king in his name. They looked at the vision behind Lu Feng with various expressions. Even Guang Ran, Tian Xing, Demeng, and Chun, the three kings of slaughter, had a look of disbelief. Lu Feng, such a heaven-defying talent from the human race. I should have thought of it. In fact, we should all have thought of it. Such a noble aura. Other than the King of Kings since of time, who else could have it? Lu Feng. He is actually from the Federation's Lu family, a descendant of the King of Humans. The entire venue was in an uproar. No one guessed Lu Feng's identity. For them, the King of Humans was no longer a legend, nor could it be described as a myth. In the era when he appeared, he dominated the universe's sea of stars. He was only a virtual king, but he had already killed and suppressed the Divine King. When he became the Divine King, he was the strongest in the world. Even the Emperor wasn't his match. In the following 1,000 years, it was the era of the King of Humans. All other races, even the Divine King, had to entrench themselves and didn't dare to appear in the world. This was the terror and greatness of the King of Humans. And now, his bloodline had actually appeared. In an instant, countless pieces of information began to spread rapidly. The awakening of the King of Humans' bloodline meant that Lu Feng was definitely a monstrous existence. There was no exception. In addition to Lu Feng's current performance, many existences felt as if they were witnessing a terrifying king slowly rising up. Lu Feng had completely awakened. In a confrontation with those ancient wills, he was the one who had won in the end. The king's glory hadn't withered, and the king's majesty hadn't diminished. In the end, he had triumphed over everything. Lu Feng had awakened, and so had his heart. I, Lu Feng, am a king, an emperor. Why do I have to learn from those people's forbearance? Even if I'm a weak king, a king is a king. My majesty and my glory can't be blasphemed. From the moment he had released his bloodline, Lu Feng had already understood what he would have to face in the future. Back then, the Lu family had done everything they could to hide the fact that his bloodline had awakened. But now, following Lu Feng's awakening, everything had become useless. However, Lu Feng didn't care about any of this. He was arrogant. Yes, incomparably arrogant. He was ignorant. Perhaps he was somewhat ignorant. However, regardless of whether he was arrogant or ignorant, Lu Feng didn't regret what he had done in the slightest. Everything was just as he had said. If he wanted to dominate the world and walk on the path to the peak, then he had to become an enemy of all. He had to walk out of the madness of slaughter and death. This was Lu Feng's path. It's time for my peerless edge to bloom. You are not bad. Lu Feng stretched out his finger and pointed at Lan Lu Lui, who was already pale in the distance, as he spoke softly. At the moment, Lu Feng was like a supreme emperor. Everything that existed was his subject. His praise was the most honorable glory in the world. With a light step, Lu Feng actually arrived directly in front of Lan Lu Lui. He nodded slightly and praised him softly. If Lu Feng had been a god, then Lan Lu Lui might have been able to accept such praise. However, Lu Feng wasn't. He was just a peak high-level martialist who was at the same level as Lan Lu Lui. He was even an opponent that Lan Lu Lui wanted to challenge. Lan Lu Lui had hidden for so long. How could he allow himself to fail like this? He couldn't. Even if he was the descendant of the first king since ancient times, he still couldn't. Die! With an earth-shattering roar, Lan Lu Lui finally achieved his craziest performance under extreme suppression. He used his most powerful strength and brandished his most powerful attack. This attack was Lan Lu Lui's most powerful attack in his life. It was a supreme attack that integrated his bloodline, his will, and his essence. This was a supreme technique. Lu Feng's eyes flashed with a trace of light. Such a strike could indeed be considered world-shaking. It should be at the peak of the god of massacre's existence. After all, the existence of a supreme technique was a terrifying killing technique that could shatter all forbidden shackles. Unfortunately, this wasn't enough for Lu Fenglai. It was far from enough. You have comprehended quality and walked into the palace of martial arts. Not bad at all. Unfortunately, your strength is really not enough for me. Facing this attack, Lu Feng didn't dodge. He wanted to use his most powerful attack to shatter such an attack. It wasn't because Lu Feng was stupid, nor was it because he was domineering. All of this was because of Lu Feng's affirmation of Lan Lu Lu. Previously, he had entered a confrontation between his heart and will. He was fighting against the undying wills of those eternal monsters all by himself, although his strength hadn't dissipated. But if Lan Lu Lui suddenly attacked at that time, he would definitely have to withdraw from that realm. For Lu Fenglai, that kind of realm was something that could only be encountered and not sought after. Fortunately, Lan Lu Lui didn't attack and chose to wait for him. Therefore, for Lu Fenglai, Lan Lu Lui had done him a favor. Although it wasn't much, Lu Feng's character was like this. He would take revenge for any enmity, and it was the same for kindness. For this punch, he would use his most powerful strength besides his trump card. Only in this way could Lan Lu Lui leave this place without any regrets. The comprehension of realm was increased by 2 times. The limit of the unique technique was increased by 9 times. He didn't hold back his physical strength and increased it by 6 times. Lu Feng's power at this moment instantly broke through 100 times. As for Lan Lu Lui, his physical body was 4 times stronger, his cultivation technique was 8 times stronger, and his quality was suppressed. Hence, he could only increase his strength by 32 times. Even if he used a supreme technique, he could only increase his strength by 50 times. There was at least a 50 times gap between him and Lu Feng. The gap between them was simply too big. One punch, just one punch, directly sent Lan Lu Lui flying. Countless blood mists appeared all over his body, as if he was about to be completely crushed. This punch almost completely smashed Lan Lu Lui into nothingness. However, Lan Lu Lui didn't die. He just fell into a coma. At the last moment, Lu Feng still held back. After battling with 2 Tianxin for a month, Lu Feng's control of his strength had also reached a pinnacle level. Usually, when he fought with 2 Tianxin, he was in the most extreme state. Besides that strange power, he was at the limit of his trump cards. At that time, he could still control a little. Now, he was only at the ordinary limit of his control. In the distance, dust flew up from the place where Lan Lu Lui fell. At this moment, there was a solemn silence in the field. Everyone looked at Lu Feng in a daze. Previously, when Lu Feng's bloodline appeared, it had shocked them, and this punch had infinitely raised Lu Feng's status in their hearts. Guangran Tianxing, Demeng, and even the dust were all strangely silent as they looked at Lu Feng, who was standing quietly in the same spot. They looked at each other, and their eyes were filled with a kind of horror. Finally, as if he couldn't stand this oppressive atmosphere, Demeng let out a long sigh. However, his eyes were still trembling with fear. A 9-fold increase in technique. A 6-fold increase in physical strength. It's really scary. He hasn't used the power of his bloodline yet. But even so, he now has the qualifications to become the Emperor of Massacre. Once he uses the power of his bloodline, he will be able to easily obtain the title of the Emperor of Massacre. Chapter 196. Lu Feng's bloodline was inherited from the Human King, the bloodline of the most powerful person in history. The power of this bloodline was famous in the universe. It was one of the most powerful bloodlines in the entire universe. It was even recognized as the most powerful among these bloodlines. Once Lu Feng unleashed the power of his bloodline, his combat strength would increase by another level. Now, he was qualified to challenge the title of Massacre Emperor. Once the power of the bloodline was activated, then who among those high-level warrior-level kings of slaughter in this land of slaughter would be able to stop him? If he's still holding back his strength, then can he really challenge that title? Demeng's words made Guang Ran Tianxing and dust suddenly stop, and then they broke out in a cold sweat. Is it really possible for him to challenge for that title? In the past 1,000 years, there have only been 2 humans who have really achieved that title. Is he going to become the third? Silence. The oppressive atmosphere was broken. No one knew when, But an ancient powerhouse appeared in the sky. His arrival did not arouse anyone's attention. Only when he spoke did everyone become vigilant. They didn't know when this type of supreme expert had arrived. Lu Feng, victory, the test continues. Everyone turned their attention to the existence in the void. However, no matter how they looked or sensed, they could not sense any trace of that existence. Guang Ran Tianxing took a deep breath, and his eyes shone brightly. This is at least a true god. Guang Ran Tianxing was already a peak perfect stage massacre emperor. With his strength, it was not a problem for him to collide with ordinary demigods. Furthermore, his perception far exceeded his cultivation level. However, he couldn't sense that figure at all. Then this existence was definitely not an ordinary god. Hearing Guang Ran Tianxing's words, Demeng and Dust nodded lightly. At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded, and it woke the three of them up. "Greetings, ancestor." The voice was very clear, and it obviously came from a young man. If that was all, the three of them would not be shocked. However, the problem was that they had heard this voice before, and they had heard it not too long ago. Lu Feng. The person who spoke was Lu Feng. At this moment, Lu Feng was standing respectfully on the spot, and he bowed to the figure. Seeing this scene, everyone in the square was in an uproar. They looked at the arbiter who had descended with a strange expression on their faces. But soon, the expressions on these people's faces gradually disappeared. Guang Ran Tianxing shrugged slightly and said, "As expected, a genius like Lu Feng would make people worry. I did not expect that even the Lu family's arbiter would appear here. Looks like in this massacre abyss, no one dares to have designs on Lu Feng." The figure in the sky was indeed the Lu family's ancestor. Although Lu Feng did not know why a member of the Lu family would become an arbiter of the massacre abyss, the bloodline connection between them clearly told him that the arbiter was the Lu family's ancestor. He might even be a direct descendant of the Lu family. The arbiter in the sky nodded gently and said slowly, "I know you, Lu Feng. I have heard about everything from the ancestor and the others. Although your sudden outburst has lost our original intention, since this is the path you have chosen, I will support it. Don't worry, in this massacre abyss, you can use your strength to your heart's content. Nobody can do anything to you here. The bloodline of the Lu family is not afraid of anyone." His last sentence shook the sky and seemed to spread beyond the sky. Everyone knew that the last sentence of the Lu family's arbiter was clearly meant to intimidate. He was telling everyone that Lu Feng was a member of the Lu family. Nobody should even think about harming him. When they heard this resounding voice, many people with strange expressions restrained themselves. Although Lu Feng was of the Lu clan's bloodline, and the Lu clan's direct bloodline was rare, there were still quite a number of them. Since the Lu family's arbiter had appeared, it was obvious that he wanted to protect Lu Feng. Thus, even if these people had any ill intentions, they would have to restrain themselves. After all, the Lu family was really terrifying. The power of a true celestial grade member of the Lu family is not inferior to any sky celestial. If they wanted to kill Lu Feng, they would need at least 2 sky celestials. However, in this massacre abyss, an area controlled by the gods, it would be extremely difficult for 2 sky celestials to descend and kill someone of the Lu family's bloodline. Therefore, I'm afraid that Lu Feng is really not in any danger. However, this is also good. I also want to see what Lu Feng's most powerful state is when he has nothing to worry about. Does he really have the qualifications and hope to break through that most powerful shackle? There was still a little more than an hour left before the end. If this had been any other time, let alone a little more than an hour, even 10 or 100 hours would not have been enough to complete the remaining challenges. However, things are different now. When Lu Feng had awakened his bloodline and unleashed that shocking attack, everyone understood that 1 hour was enough. Once his bloodline was awakened, he would definitely have the strength of a young, supreme being like the Massacre Emperor. Now, all he had to do was fight against some of the Massacre Celestials. This was not difficult at all. No matter how deeply hidden the Massacre Celestials were, they would definitely not be a match for the Massacre Emperor. Lu Feng was not in a hurry to find his next opponent. For him, the so-called title might be somewhat attractive, but compared to a breakthrough, it was much less attractive. Of course, if it was a massacre emperor, he might be a little more excited. What he was doing now was quietly looking at the ancestor of the Lu family in the sky. He was constantly pondering in his heart. Why would the ancestor of the Lu family be here? I can feel that this ancestor of the Lu family should be a direct descendant of the Lu family's bloodline. He should be a direct descendant with a complete bloodline of the human monarch. However, why would he appear here? This is the Massacre Abyss, not the Milky Way. Moreover, the actual controller of this place is that mysterious terrorist organization, the Gods. Could it be that this ancestor of the Lu family is a member of the Gods? Lu Feng frowned slightly. He didn't know anything about this mysterious organization, the Gods. However, to be able to dominate such a terrifying galaxy and still exist peacefully after countless geniuses had fallen, the Gods organization was definitely abnormally powerful. It should not be any less terrifying than a peak Overlord race. However, how did all this have anything to do with the Lu family? When he saw Lu Feng's expression, the mighty figure in the sky smiled slowly. His voice rang clearly in Lu Feng's ears. Lu Feng, you don't have to think about it. You will know everything about the Gods. However, now is not the time. Work hard. First, become the Massacre God, then directly advance and become the Massacre Emperor. You will become a young supreme existence. When that time comes, you will reap unimaginable rewards. When he heard this, Lu Feng was slightly stunned. Previously, Tu Tianxin had told Lu Feng that this time, Lu Feng must obtain the title of the Massacre Emperor. In Lu Feng's opinion, Tu Tianxin was just setting a goal for himself, hoping that he could forcefully advance in these battles of slaughter. However, now it seemed that this wasn't the case. He wasn't thinking about anything. Now that he had comprehended the existence of the realm, he was no worse than the Massacre Emperor in terms of comprehension on the path of martial arts. Moreover, his trump card was something that no Massacre Emperor could compare to. In addition to his cultivation method and physical body, there was no need to talk about becoming the Massacre Emperor. If he used that strange power, Lu Feng even had the chance to become the Massacre King. This was a possibility for him to become a supreme existence. He nodded his head lightly. Then he said, "Please arrange for the next opponent to appear." In the sky, the arbitrator of the Lu family smiled faintly. When he arrived here, the entire Massacre Star had been completely taken over by him. Therefore, he was the one giving orders at this moment. Find all the remaining 9 people. After saying this, the patriarch of the Lu family looked at Lu Feng and said, "I think this is what you were thinking as well." Lu Feng smiled and nodded. The noble aura of an emperor pervading his body became even more intense, making his not-so-tall figure seem unparalleled. As you wish, patriarch, let them fight together in this battle. If it was in the past, then such an approach would be completely arrogant without boundaries. This was simply courting death. Among the 10 people that Lu Feng had challenged, although Lanlu Yi of the War God clan had already been defeated, none of the remaining 9 were easy to deal with. They had definitely comprehended substance and set foot on the path of martial arts. Their own strength was already enough to challenge the Massacre God. Lu Feng was going to face the 9 gods of slaughter in this battle. The god of massacre was already a demon-level existence in the pinnacle Overlord race like the humans. It would be extremely difficult to defeat one of them one-on-one. However, Lu Feng wanted to fight all 9 of them. This was indeed hard to believe. However, no one was thinking this at the moment. The power that Lu Feng had displayed just now had already far exceeded the limits of what these people could reach. Furthermore, Lu Feng had the human monarch bloodline, which was the strongest in the universe. As long as he activated his human monarch bloodline, he would probably be able to challenge the Massacre God. Therefore, fighting all 9 of them alone wasn't a problem at all. Every time an assessment took place, the people taking the assessment would be on standby at any time. They could afford to wait for 10 days. Therefore, by the time the Lu family's patriarch finished speaking, The 9 people had already walked out. If this had been any other time, their appearance would have been enough to cause a huge commotion. Any one of them would have been a peerless demon-level overlord of a race. They were enough to create legends that belonged to them. However, when the 9 of them appeared together, no one was cheering for them anymore. Perhaps in the eyes of these onlookers, these people were just some people who were about to be defeated and whose mythical halos were about to be shattered. The massacre gods were suppressing them one by one. They were all existences that could definitely become the massacre gods. They couldn't tolerate being looked at this way by so many existences. However, even though they were furious, all their emotions were suppressed when they faced Lu Feng. The only thing that remained was sorrow. We have become a halo in the end. Perhaps the significance of our appearance now is to serve as a foil to his unparalleled greatness. Lu Feng started to move as he slowly walked towards the 9 people. At the moment, he was a true supreme emperor. The 9 of them were Lu Feng's subjects who were going to be inspected by this supreme emperor. They didn't like this feeling. They really didn't like it. However, in the face of absolute power, what else could they do? When the Lu family's patriarch finished speaking, the 9 people finally made their move. They didn't hold anything back. In an instant, they revealed everything and poured out all their power. Supreme techniques. Supreme techniques. Supreme techniques. Every single one of them used a supreme technique right away. Chapter 197. They knew. The moment they saw Lu Feng's strength, they knew. Faced with such a monster, they had no chance of winning. Hence, they used their final trump card right from the start. They used their supreme techniques. Kill. It was a sad prelude. This was the bleakness of the era. Faced with a peerless genius like Lu Feng, their halo had completely retreated. They could only play a supporting role. However, so what if they were just supporting roles? They also wanted to bloom with their own brilliance. The appearance of any one of the 9 ultimate killing techniques was comparable to, or even surpassing Lu Lan's unparalleled attack. The entire sky started to turn chaotic. Endless turbulence was being crushed. This ancient killing ground faintly started to shake. This killing ground was an ancient place that had endured countless years of engravings. Although it couldn't be compared to those pinnacle battlefields, it was able to withstand the baptism of so many terrifying battles. There was no need to say more about its sturdiness. After all, the battles here weren't just between high-level warriors and the massacre gods. There were also battles between perfect stage warriors. However, at this moment, the 9 of them charged forward with an indomitable aura. They poured everything they had into this ultimate massacre, causing this ancient land of massacre to begin to shake slightly. In the face of the 9 people's strongest attacks, Lu Feng nodded gently. His aura also started to soar infinitely. You are all very powerful. You should all shine for a while. Unfortunately, you shouldn't fight with me. Only because I am the Supreme Emperor. Lu Feng moved. His physical strength bloomed. The 9-fold amplification of Soul Honored One was activated. The power of his bloodline was slightly activated. In an instant, the ancient and powerful human king avatar appeared once again. The combined killing of the 9 people was something that even the massacre god, who was at the pinnacle, wouldn't dare to resist. Hence, Lu Feng finally activated a trace of the power of his bloodline. At this moment, Lu Feng, under the entanglement of the great human king's bloodline, was even more imposing and unparalleled. He was a true emperor descending to the world. I am the emperor. This was the attack that Lu Feng had comprehended after experiencing the battle with those indestructible ancient wills for 9 days and 9 nights. It was the first real move that he had evolved from Soul Honored One. I am the emperor. The world is vast. The universe is vast. And there are countless living beings. But I am the only eternal emperor. Millions of worlds, millions upon millions of saints, under my command, all must submit. This was the embodiment of Lu Feng's will. It was infused with an unparalleled, noble aura and mixed with his ultimate belief. This was the starting point of Lu Feng's path to becoming a king. Finally, they collided. This strike was already indescribable. The power of the first supreme technique collided and shattered. The second strike was shattered. The third one was shattered. The eighth beam was shattered. The ninth beam was shattered. Between heaven and earth, there was only silence. In the sky, the Lu family's patriarch's expression didn't change. He was still the same as before. But no one knew the fear in his heart at this moment. Although Lu Feng's strength was strong, at this moment, he could even kill a high evolution period martial artist. However, this kind of power was really nothing in his eyes. After all, he was a direct descendant of the Lu family, with his strength that was comparable to a heavenly god. As long as he used his maximum strength, even a small galaxy would be smashed to pieces. What really shocked him was Lu Feng's current performance. When Lu Feng had first appeared in the Lu family, the Lu family's descendants who had drifted outside had already received the notice. As a direct descendant of the Lu family and a true God-stage descendant of the Lu family, he naturally had the qualifications to know everything about Lu Feng's situation. It was precisely because he knew that he was so shocked. The strength that Lu Feng was displaying now was more than 100 times stronger than when he had first entered the Lu family. Although he had risen from a peak mid-level warrior to a peak high-level warrior. However, the extent of this increase was a little too ridiculous. On the other hand, the thing that shocked him the most was the Supreme Emperor Dao aura. Other people only thought that Lu Feng's strength and nobility were because of his human monarch bloodline. However, this ancestor knew that such nobility could not be bestowed by a human monarch bloodline. Even though Lu Feng had bloodline shackles and a bloodline concentration that was closest to a human monarch bloodline since ancient times. However, such nobility was definitely not bestowed by a bloodline. Perhaps if my ancestor, the human monarch, truly awakens, the nobility on his body will be comparable to Lu Feng's. The Lu family's ancestor was shocked by the thought that appeared in his mind. He tried hard to expel this thought from his mind. Then, he looked at Lu Feng, who was already standing below, and said slowly, "The 10 battles have ended. Lu Feng is victorious." Title, God of Massacre. There was no doubt about this. Although Lu Feng had completed it on the 10th day, he had been in a state of comprehension for more than 9 days. The time that he had spent on these 10 battles was not even an hour. It had been too many years since such a scene had appeared. Back then, Kingslayer Lu Tao was so stunning and peerless that he was just as terrifying. When he advanced to the God of Massacre, he challenged the Sky of Massacre, which was ranked in the top 10 of the entire Massacre land at that time. He punched them one by one and went straight into the God of Massacre. Although Lu Feng's opponents were not as good as Kingslayers, in the end, he blew up the Sky of Massacre, which was ranked in the top 1,000 of the 9 continents, with one punch. Compared to Kingslayer, his performance was not much worse. The bloodline of the Lu family is indeed abnormally terrifying. Many spectators stood up and looked at Lu Feng, who was in the middle of the arena, and sighed emotionally. However, these people did not have any other thoughts at this moment. In the sky, the arbitrator of the Lu family was intimidating the entire Massacre planet. No one doubted that if anyone wanted to harm Lu Feng, the Lu family's ancestor would not hesitate to kill them all. Although there were rules in the Massacre land, and many of the arbitrators were strongly restrained. However, for the universe's #1 bloodline, the #1 aristocratic family, the rules were not that effective. This time, it's really going to be interesting. I think Lu Feng will definitely not stop at the God of Massacre, or even the title of King of Massacre. As long as he uses all of his bloodline power, I'm afraid that even the average King of Massacre will not be his match. As a descendant of the Lu family, how can he not have a trump card? I still remember the Lu family's supreme technique, the terror of the universe's #1 ultimate secret technique, King's Descent. I'm afraid that if he uses all of his trump cards and uses King's Descent, he might temporarily have the power to look down on all King of Massacre. The Liu family of this era is really terrifying. After Kingslayer, there is actually another existence with the potential to become the king of Massacre. I think that the days ahead are going to be exciting. Guang Ren Tianxing let out a long sigh. He looked at the unusually silent dust beside him and did not say anything else. Many existences knew about the hatred between the Netherworld race and the human race. If it were not for this, that peerless ancestor of the Netherworld race would not have woken up temporarily when Kingslayer became a god and shattered Lu Tao's King's Road. Back then, your Netherworld race was able to stop Lu Tao from entering the King's Road. I wonder if he could do the same this time. Damon looked at dust and sighed slightly. Everyone was very displeased with the Netherworld race ancestors' forceful awakening just to shatter Lu Tao's King's Road. After all, in this land of massacre, many existences idolized Lu Tao. However, no matter how dissatisfied they were, they could not say anything. After all, that was King of the Netherworld, a legendary being who had reached the peak of level 1 mythical domain, or even level 2 mythical domain. Fortunately, the Liu family seems to have been born with a curse. The strongest existence of the Liu family bloodline is only the virtual king, and there is no one who has even reached the quasi-king level. Otherwise, I'm afraid the entire universe will experience another human king era. The news of Liu Feng being titled the God of Massacre was spread. However, what really caused a stir in the entire Massacre Abyss was not the title of the God of Massacre. After all, although it was difficult to produce a God of Massacre, there were still many every year. What really caused a stir in the Massacre Abyss was Liu Feng's identity. The direct bloodline of the Liu family. He has the complete bloodline of the Liu family. This Liu Feng is probably going to become the Emperor of Massacre soon. When that time comes, there will be something interesting to watch. On an ancient planet, a young supreme of a foreign race stood up and jumped toward a super-killing star. They had already received news that the arbitrator of the Liu family had brought Liu Feng to that super-killing star. At this moment, the clouds were really moving everywhere. If it was just a normal competition for the title of Emperor of Massacre, these young supreme beings would not choose to come personally unless it was a battle for the title of Emperor of Massacre at the upheaval or perfect stage. However, everything was different now. The reason being that the challenger this time was Liu Feng, because his surname was Liu. 30 years ago, the Liu family's monstrous genius, Lu Tao, was extremely powerful. In just 5 days, he directly became the king of Massacre, the supreme emperor of the younger generation. 10 years ago, the Liu family's monstrous genius, Lu Luo, also shook the galaxy. Although he was not as good as Lu Tao, he was almost in the realm of the king of Massacre. Although it was almost destined that he would never succeed in his life, such glory still shocked the entire Massacre Abyss and even the entire galaxy. This time, I don't know if this Liu Fo will be able to accomplish such a great feat. The Luo Emperor of Eastwater and the Rong Emperor of Westland. They were ranked second among the 7 great supreme beings of the younger generation of the human race. They were ranked second among the human race, and they were also at the peak of the entire universe. Back then, the 2 emperors of the human race swept through the Massacre Abyss. None of the slaughterers could stop them. If the 2 young supreme beings had not fought at the last moment, they might have really walked into the borderline realm of the King of Massacre. Of course, this was only what the outside world thought. The real situation was not something that ordinary people could guess. On this day, the Massacre Star of Asia was in endless turmoil. Many ancient auras in the entire Massacre Abyss were awakened, and then all of them rushed toward the Massacre Abyss, which was famous throughout the universe. At this moment, Liu Feng was quietly following beside the Liu family's patriarch, listening to him talk about everything that had happened in the Massacre Abyss. Liu Feng, you must be wondering why I, a direct descendant of the Liu family, would appear in the Massacre Abyss. Chapter 198. Liu Feng nodded gently. He was indeed very confused. According to what he knew, The Massacre Abyss seemed to belong to the gods' organization. However, Lu Feng found the Lu family's direct descendant here. This was a bit unusual. The Lu family's ancestor smiled gently and said, "Actually, this is nothing. You didn't know before because your level was too low and your strength was too weak, so you didn't know. However, it's different now. From the moment you became the Massacre Sky, you already have the right to know everything." After a pause, the Lu family's ancestor continued, "You should know what power controls the Massacre Abyss, right?" Lu Feng nodded gently and said, "I heard that it's an organization called the Gods, but I don't know anything about it. I looked it up from the Sky Network's core, but my level is too low, so I can't see it." The Lu family's ancestor knew that everything Lu Feng said was true. Before Lu Feng revealed his strength, his Sky Network's level was the lowest. Although he could enter the Sky Network's core, he could only see the news in the Sky Network's core. The extent of his authority to search was very limited. If you want to understand the Massacre Abyss, then you must first understand the existence of the gods. The gods is a very old organization. Its existence can be traced back to more than 10,000 years ago. In the beginning, this power was founded by a large peak race and dozens of first-rate and second-rate races. After a period of development, another peak Overlord race and hundreds of first-rate and second-rate races joined. This is how the Gods organization, which is entrenched in the Milky Way and hundreds of super galaxies around it, came into being. At this point, the Lu family's ancestor suddenly stopped. He turned to look at Lu Feng and said, "You should know its founder. He is the peerless Divine King, the ancestor of our human race, the Divine King, the first Divine King." At this moment, Lu Feng finally understood everything. He finally knew why the Lu family's patriarch was here. It turned out that the founder of the Gods organization was actually a human, and it was actually the first Divine King. Ancestor, the other peak dominator tribe, should be the Divine Battle tribe, right? Outside of the Milky Way, the gods controlled hundreds of super galaxies. However, due to the uniqueness of the Milky Way, Lu Feng knew that the main forces of the gods were definitely concentrated in the Milky Way. In the Milky Way galaxy, there were 3 overlord races. They were the human race, the underworld race, and the war god race. The underworld race and the human race had a huge grudge against each other, and they weren't a pure race in the Milky Way. Therefore, the last possibility was the war god race. Upon hearing that Lu Feng had already guessed everything, the Lu family's patriarch revealed a look of approval. He gently nodded and said, "Indeed, the 2 overlords of the gods organization are the human race and the war god race. Although the Massacre Abyss belongs to the periphery of the Milky Way, it is under the control of the human race. Because of its uniqueness, as a part of the human race, my Lu family also sent people to guard and suppress this place. Lu Feng, do you know why I want you to become the Massacre Emperor?" Lu Feng shook his head. At first, he didn't have any doubts. However, when the Lu family's patriarch and Tu Tianxin both said the same thing, Lu Feng knew that there must be something hidden here. You probably don't know the origin of the Massacre Abyss. A long time ago, it could be said that the Massacre Abyss existed long before the civilization of this era. No one could investigate the origin and age of the Massacre Abyss. However, according to the judgment of those experts, the Massacre Abyss has probably existed for countless eras. It might even have followed the primitive Immortal Devil era. At this moment, Lu Feng was a little shocked. The Immortal Devil era. That was the most primitive era. The origin of all civilizations. The Immortal Devil era could be said to be the most dazzling era. There were countless experts, and the Divine King's experts were endless. Any living creature was born above the gods. Those who could become immortal devils were, without exception, the Virtual King or even the Void Emperor level existences. In the legends, the dominating existences of the Immortal Devil era had already surpassed the limits of fate, surpassing the Divine King and the God Emperor. However, such an incomparably resplendent, incomparably luxurious, and grand era had suddenly vanished into thin air. This was the biggest mystery in the entire universe. No one knew the root cause of the disappearance of immortal devils. Some people said that at the end of the civilization era, the disaster that affected the universe made them disappear. Many people agreed with this theory, but in the eyes of those true extreme Tao experts, this theory was simply untenable. With the incomparably terrifying strength of the immortal devil era, a disaster that ended the universe was simply unable to annihilate them. Many of the ancient and forbidden areas that remain today were passed down from the immortal devil era. Many of the things they created had survived several great disasters of the universe without being destroyed. In that case, they should not have been annihilated by the great disasters of the universe. Therefore, the true reason for the end of the immortal devil era had always been a mystery that countless living beings did not know the answer to. This massacre abyss is actually passed down from the immortal devil era. How is that possible? Seeing Lu Feng's expression, the Lu family's patriarch understood Lu Feng's shock. When he first heard about it, he had also been the same. However, this is just a guess. What we can be sure of is that the massacre abyss must have experienced several great disasters of the universe without being destroyed. It can almost be said to have truly existed for eternity. Of course, this massacre abyss is not the planet you came to experience. It is the true massacre abyss located in the deepest part of the Great Yin Galaxy. That is the true primitive massacre abyss. Lu Feng could also guess this. He nodded his head lightly. There is a great secret in the massacre abyss. It seems to have something to do with the immortal devil era or the end of these eras. Unfortunately, there was no way to know this secret. The massacre abyss was set up not only to nurture a powerful generation, but also to discover the secret of the massacre abyss. Lu Feng frowned slightly. The secret of the massacre abyss was related to the great disaster of the universe. Lu Feng understood that such a secret was shocking. Even an expert like the Divine King would have to personally investigate it. After all, even the Divine King would not be able to survive the great disaster of the universe. However, the Lu family's patriarch said that no one knew the secret. This was a little interesting. Patriarch, if what you said is true, I think even an expert like the Divine King would be tempted by the secret. Even if an expert like the Divine King did not appear, the virtual king or even a quasi-king level expert would appear. Could it be that even a quasi-overlord of the universe could not enter? The Lu family's patriarch shook his head gently and said, "No. So far, only 4 people have been rumored to have entered the center of the massacre abyss. They are the human race's ancestor, the Divine King, the first Divine King, the ancient ancestor of the serene blood race, the legendary invincible Overlord who had stepped into the Divine King's third realm, the nether heavenly venerate, and the Sky Devil race's ancestor, the great Sky Devil Emperor. These 3 are the ancestors of the 3 great Overlord races. They are tyrannical and unparalleled. They are the strongest overlords since ancient times. They are legendary, invincible existences who had stepped into the third realm of the myth realm. Only such existences can enter the center of the massacre abyss. However, it was a pity that although they had entered, there was not a single word about it being passed down. The 3 invincible Divine Kings were the strongest overlords of their era. If they did not say anything, no one would dare to force them to reveal the secret. Thus, no one knows anything about it. Lu Feng was silent. Indeed, he had heard of the 3 invincible Divine Kings. The third realm of the myth realm was the peak of the Divine King's realm. Since ancient times, there were only a few people who could step into this realm. However, in the next moment, Lu Feng frowned slightly. He asked, "Patriarch, didn't you say there were 4? Then, the Lu family's patriarch laughed. At this moment, he was filled with a feeling called pride. Looking at Lu Feng, the Lu family's patriarch said solemnly, "The last one is our Lu family's ancestor, the Human King." Human King. It was actually the Human King. After thinking for a while, Lu Feng understood. Whether it was the first Divine King, Heavenly Venerable Hades, or the Great Sky Demon Emperor, They were all the strongest divine kings who could look down on all the divine kings in the universe since ancient times. However, the human king of the human race was recognized as the strongest person. He was a heaven-defying divine king who was even more powerful than the three strongest divine kings. Since the three divine kings had entered before, the human king, as the strongest person, should be the same. Yes, our Lu family's ancestor, the human king, is even more powerful than the three strongest divine kings. He knows this secret, but is unwilling to reveal it. Naturally, no one dares to force him. Lu Feng nodded slightly. However, after hearing Lu Feng's words, the Lu family's patriarch shook his head. He said, "Actually, everything is not what you think. When our Lu family's ancestor, the human king, entered the core area of the massacre abyss, he had not even stepped into the divine spirit realm. He entered when he was in the evolution stage." Lu Feng was a little dazed. Even divine king powerhouses could not enter. Only the strongest divine king at the third stage of the myth domain had the qualifications to enter. However, the human king had entered when he was in the evolution stage. This was a little too inconceivable. Could it be that the human king at the evolution stage was comparable to the strongest divine king at the third stage of the myth domain? Puzzled, Lu Feng looked at the Lu family's patriarch. At this time, the Lu family's patriarch began to explain. Everything is not what you think. Back then, our ancestor, the human king, was far from reaching the great success stage, but he entered. Many races wanted to know the secrets within, so they began to search for the human king. However, in the end, they did not catch the Lu family's patriarch. Instead, they used their tempering to climb up the peerless altar step by step and become the strongest powerhouse since ancient times. However, our ancestor, the human king, once said that if you want to enter the deepest part of the massacre abyss, it has nothing to do with strength. Compared to powerhouses like the divine king, those who have not become divine spirits have more advantages. This is because the more powerful they are, the greater the suffering they have to endure. Hearing this, Lu Feng suddenly understood. He continued, "Then, patriarch, did you establish the massacre abyss and select the most heaven-defying geniuses so that a monstrous genius who can endure this endless suffering would appear and reveal the true secret of the massacre abyss to the world?" The Lu family's patriarch nodded and said yes. Only the massacre emperor has the qualifications to try. Of course, even if you fail, it is nothing. Those difficult trials and tribulations have unimaginable benefits for a martialist cultivation. Almost every existence that enters can break through a small boundary, at the very least. Those who are lucky can even advance directly from the initial stage to the peak stage. Tempering. There was actually an endless amount of tempering inside. At this moment, Lu Feng finally understood what Tu Tianxin meant. After hearing about the characteristics of his cultivation technique, Tu Tianxin had brought him here so that he could break through. However, the real way for him to break through was not just through combat. If he could not break through in combat, then he could enter the massacre abyss to break through. It was no wonder that Tu Tianxin had given him the title of the Massacre Emperor. Patriarch, did our ancestor, the human king, not reveal any of the secrets within back then? The Lu family's patriarch's footsteps came to a halt as his voice slowly traveled over. Our ancestor, the human king, only said one thing to his bloodline descendants, and that was so everything turned out to be like this. Chapter 199. The challenge of the Emperor of Massacre was very simple. That was to battle with the god of Massacre and make the Emperor of Massacre, who was more powerful than the three of them, acknowledge his strength. Of course, there are also standards. To become the Emperor of Massacre, one's physical strength had to be increased by 4 times. This was nothing. But for a slaughterer at the advanced warrior level, it was a rather difficult path. After all, only the Divine King's bloodline and those strange life forms could have 4 times the physical strength of a high-level warrior. In addition to the physical strength, there were also requirements for the comprehension of the cultivation technique. The amplification of the cultivation technique had to be at least 7 times. This requirement was more difficult for warriors in the perfect stage or even the upheaval stage. After all, it was extremely difficult for such a level to comprehend the cultivation technique to increase it by 7 times. But for a high-level warrior, it was actually very simple. Generally, the god of massacre who could become a high-level warrior would have a comprehension of the cultivation technique that was at least 7 times stronger. And for those who were more monstrous, it wouldn't be difficult for them to comprehend 8 times or even 9 times the limit. The last requirement was that one's comprehension of the martial Tao had to reach the realm level. Not a single one of the 3 requirements could be missing. Only by meeting all of them and gaining the recognition of the 3 emperors of massacre could one be truly titled the Emperor of Massacre. Lu Feng stood beside the Lu family's ancestor, but a strange smile hung on the corner of his mouth. Of the 3 conditions, he met all of them, and he surpassed all of them. Therefore, he already had the qualifications to challenge the Emperor of Massacre. But there was a problem with the final requirement to get the recognition of more than 3 emperors of massacre. After all, if those people didn't like him and refused to recognize him, that wouldn't work no matter how strong he was. Of course, this was just Lu Feng's imagination. I must obtain the title of the Emperor of Massacre. If you don't accept it, then I'll beat you until you admit it. Lu Feng had never expected these people to acknowledge his existence. He was the king, the strongest emperor of everything. Being acknowledged by others was a privilege reserved for the weak. He, Lu Feng, wanted to acknowledge himself, wanted to make himself acknowledge others. The Lu family's ancestor didn't do anything for a long time, as if they were communicating in the void. After waiting for half an hour, the Lu family's ancestor finally returned to his previous appearance. He looked at Lu Feng and said, "Okay, Lu Feng, your qualifications have been confirmed. When do you plan to challenge me?" This time, Tu Tianxin didn't appear, but Lu Feng knew that the mysterious powerhouse was hiding around him. It was only because of the arrival of the Lu clan's patriarch that he hid himself. During this period, the Lu Feng, the Lu family's ancestor, Lu Feng, Lu Feng's Lu Feng. Therefore, Lu Feng didn't say anything and only said that a senior had brought him here. The Lu family's ancestor might have received some instructions from the Lu family's strongest ancestor. Although Lu Feng didn't say anything, he didn't force Lu Feng to say anything. Now, without Tu Tianxin by his side, Lu Feng's arrangements were all left to the Lu family's ancestor. Upon hearing the ancestor's question, Lu Feng said without hesitation, "Ancestor, my condition has been raised to the peak. In that case, let's do it now. I want to become the king of massacre in one go." The Lu family's ancestor nodded gently. He could feel that after going through these battles, Lu Feng hadn't suffered any losses. He was indeed at the peak of his condition, as he had said. Since Lu Feng's fighting spirit was high, then let's do as he said and do it directly. Good. At this moment, almost all the kings of massacre in the massacre abyss have gathered. As for the high-level warrior kings of massacre, except for 3 who returned to their own clans, the other 5 have already arrived. If you want to fight, then let's fight. With them here, they can bear witness to everything. In an hour, in the Aki massacre field, Lu Feng, it will be the battle that will make you famous in the universe. The Aki land of slaughter was the largest land of slaughter on this superplanet called the Aki Star of Slaughter. It was also a land of slaughter that could only be used to challenge the Emperor of Slaughter. Arranging for Lu Feng to stay, there was a well-deserved reputation. Soon, the sky above the entire Aki massacre star was shrouded in the same voice. The god of massacre, Lu Feng, will challenge the high-level warrior king of massacre in the Aki massacre field in an hour. The next moment, the same voice rang out on the surrounding 4 super killing stars. Only a moment later, the same voice rang out on the tens of thousands of killing stars in the entire massacre abyss. This time, the entire massacre abyss was completely shaken. Many people who knew of Lu Feng's existence before knew that Lu Feng would challenge the King of Massacre in the near future. But they didn't expect that the near future would be today, less than 3 hours after he obtained the God of Massacre. So arrogant, so confident, strong all the way, he's going straight into the King of Massacre's domain. Lu Feng, I'd like to see if you're really qualified to be recognized by us. An Emperor of Massacre of the Nether race grinned maliciously and flew directly towards the land of Massacre of Asia. The surroundings shook and the clouds moved. In an instant, the entire Aki Massacre field was in an uproar. Countless powerhouses and people of high status gathered towards the massacre grounds of Asia. Looking at the countless people gathered in the Aki Massacre field, Damon sighed softly and said, "Such a grand occasion hasn't been seen for many years. Even when you advanced to the King of Massacre some time ago, it couldn't compare to this scene." After saying this, Damon looked at Guang Ran Tianxing, who was abnormally silent beside him. After hearing this, Guang Ran Tianxing just smiled indifferently. This is how it should be. Although I'm the King of Massacre at the perfect stage. But this reputation can't compare to the sensation of the human monarch bloodline. In the past 100 years, of the 2 human monarch bloodlines that came here, one became the King of Massacre, while the other became the King of Massacre, and even the most powerful existence among the Kings of Massacre. So it's only natural that the third time can cause such a sensation. Damon didn't say anything and nodded softly. Indeed, just the words human monarch bloodline was enough to cause an endless commotion. And the previous 2 human monarch bloodlines' glorious battle records made countless people pay attention to the 3rd human monarch bloodline. Although this was only a qualification battle for the advanced warrior realm, relying on the human monarch Lu family's foundation, it wouldn't take long for Lu Feng to be able to break through to the demigod realm. Therefore, realms weren't that big of a deal. There's less than 10 minutes left. We'll go in 2, just in time to meet those old friends. Those who could be called old friends by Damon were definitely existences on the same level. They were all Kings of Massacre. This time, the qualification battle for the King of Massacre not only attracted Kings of Massacre in the realm of senior warriors, but also other Kings of Massacre in other realms who had time to spare. It could be said that this was a true, flourishing age. Quietly standing in the center of the massacre grounds, Lu Feng closed his eyes slightly. At this moment, his heart had already sunk into a rare tranquility. Feeling everything in his body, Lu Feng was incomparably eager to fight at this moment. Is it finally time? The second stage of the Great Devil True Body was to use endless battles to break through the shackles. And at this moment, Lu Feng also felt it. He felt the call from within his body. That was the desire to break through. That was the sound of wanting to fight. King of Massacre, I'm coming. He had to win the battle against the various Kings of Massacre, so that at least 3 Kings of Massacre would acknowledge his status as a young supremacy. This was different from the assessment of the God of Massacre. At that time, many people who wanted to advance to the God of Massacre had chosen weaker opponents. However, in the battle for the advancement of the God of Massacre to the Emperor of Massacre, most of the candidates chose the most powerful God of Massacre. Being able to advance to the King of Massacre was already proof of their existence. This kind of terrifying existence was a peerless, demonic existence. How could they possibly choose some weak existences to humiliate their own glory? Only the strong, only those at the peak could temper themselves. They all believed that they were invincible among those at the same level. Therefore, if they wanted to fight, they had to choose the strongest gods of Massacre. This time, the Lu family's patriarch had arranged 7 opponents for Lu Feng. These 7 people were currently in the top 10 of the Massacre Abyss. They also stood quietly on one side of the arena, waiting for the assessment to begin. Looking at the silent figure in the middle of the field, a half-wolf, half-human alien god of Massacre revealed a trace of madness and malevolence. Is this the bloodline of the Lu family? It has to be said that the bloodline of the Lu family has the innate ability to challenge everything. However, If he wants to rely on the bloodline of the Liu family to advance to the King of Massacre, then he is too naive. I, the Abyss Wolf, also have the noblest bloodline. Last time, I failed to advance to the King of Massacre. This time, I will begin my path to supremacy with you. The Abyss Wolf had the bloodline of a first-rate race, the Sky Wolf tribe. In the past, the Sky Wolf tribe had once produced an exceptional divine king called the Sky Wolf Divine King. Under his leadership, the Sky Wolf tribe had once become a top race in the universe. Unfortunately, the talents of the later generations had withered, and no one had been able to become a divine king. This had led to the decline of the Sky Wolf tribe, which had eventually become a first-rate race. Now, the Sky Wolf tribe had finally ushered in a golden age. The Abyss Wolf was one of the hopes of the Sky Wolf tribe's revival. Finally, the voice of the Liu family's patriarch was heard. The battle had officially begun. The Abyss Wolf, who didn't care about the surrounding gods of massacre, arrived at the center of the massacre ground in one step. He looked at Liu Feng in front of him and said malevolently, "Abyss Wolf of the Sky Wolf tribe, ranked second among the gods of massacre." Liu Feng opened his eyes slightly and glanced at the Abyss Wolf in front of him. He nodded his head gently. Liu Feng already knew the identities of the 7 people that the Liu family's patriarch had found for him. The Abyss Wolf was ranked second among the gods of massacre at the advanced warrior level in the massacre ground. It was widely acknowledged that his combat power was unparalleled and that he was close to the King of Massacre. If he was lucky, he definitely had a chance to advance to the King of Massacre. Chapter 200. Second, why not first? Liu Feng said. His voice was calm, but his calm words infuriated Abyss Wolf. We tried to become the Emperor of Massacre. He was already powerful enough. At the last moment, if that person hadn't appeared, he would have been promoted. Thinking of that person, Abyss Wolf's expression became ferocious. This bastard sky screen. You already have the power of the Emperor of Massacre, but why don't you promote? Instead, you're here to stop us. This Liu Feng is also hateful. This time, I'll use my most powerful power and this mythical bloodline to prove that I, Abyss Wolf, belong to the Emperor of Massacre. Abyss Wolf's aura started to change slowly. A steaming willpower rose slowly, as if it could swallow the world and shatter the stars. Although the Sky Wolf race has declined and become a first-class race, their bloodline is still terrifying. Back then, the Divine King of Sky Wolf dominated the universe with the power of swallowing. Even the universe overlords at the same level as the Divine King would have a headache if they encountered him. The Sky Wolf body is one of the most brilliant bodies in the universe. Although it's not as terrifying as the God of Hell's supreme body, it's among the top among the billions of races. I didn't expect Abyss Wolf to use his most powerful power right away. Using the Sky Wolf body meant that Abyss Wolf had started to call on his most powerful bloodline power. He had pushed his bloodline power to the limit. No matter how powerful the battle was, no one dared to have too many tricks up their sleeves. Bloodline recovery was one of the last and most powerful trump cards. There was almost no trump card in the world that could compare with the increase in power brought by bloodline recovery. After all, the Divine King was a true supreme overlord of the universe who could compete with the top great beings of the previous civilizations. Their bloodlines were extremely noble and powerful. Liu Feng, release your bloodline of the human king. Although my ancestor Sky Wolf King wasn't as powerful as the human king, I'll kill his descendants this time. I want all the creatures to know that the era of the human king has already withered. The future era is destined to belong to the Sky Wolf race. Arrogant. That was the thought that came to everyone's mind after hearing Abyss Wolf's words. The Emperors of Slaughter laughed coldly. Those who could become the Emperor of Massacre were basically those with the Divine King's bloodline. And the races with the Divine King were basically all peak overlords. Not to mention that the Divine King of Heavenly Wolf had already fallen. Even if Heavenly Wolf was still alive, he would definitely not dare to say such words. After all, The divine king of a pinnacle overlord race had terrifying accumulations. Their strength wasn't something that those races that relied on a single divine king to reach the pinnacle could compare with. It had been over 500 years since the last divine king of the human race, the divine king, had perished. But during this time, the human race was still the most powerful race in the universe. They were even publicly recognized as the second most powerful race. Even without the divine king, no other peak overlord dared to covet them. This abyss wolf probably didn't know the terror of a peak overlord race. Lu Feng coldly looked at the abyss wolf, whose will had reached the heavens after the bloodline was activated. He suddenly laughed mockingly. My human king bloodline's glory has withered? My human king bloodline's glory is gone? What a joke. What a joke. Since you want to see the terror of the human king bloodline, then let's fight. Facing the abyss wolf who had activated his bloodline power, if Lu Feng didn't reveal his bloodline trump card, he wouldn't be a match for him at all. Although he looked down on his opponent in terms of qualifications, Lu Feng was extremely serious in battle. The moment he finished speaking, a shocking phenomenon appeared behind Lu Feng. It was an incomparably huge giant ancestor, crushing the earth with his feet, plucking the stars with his hands. Human King. This is the bloodline of the human king. Such a realistic projection. This Lu Feng is only in the advanced warrior realm, but he can actually activate such a clear projection. Could it be that his bloodline is even denser than Lu Luo from before? Monster. This definitely belongs to a peerless monster. I really look forward to fighting him with all my strength. A peerless monster. Even with such a shocking phenomenon, Lu Feng was still a peerless monster in their eyes. The limit that these people could think of was a peerless monster at the peak. As for calling him an extreme monster, these people didn't even dare to think about it. After all, only 4 extreme monsters had appeared in the entire Massacre Abyss in the past 500 years. Looking at the human king projection in the distance that had already surged to the extreme and was about to burst the sky, more and more powerhouses stood up. They weren't being oppressed by Lu Feng. After all, no matter how terrifying the current Lu Feng was, he definitely wouldn't be able to oppress these people. Therefore, they stood up only out of respect. They respected the past and, until now, the number 1 powerhouse in the universe. In this era, he was publicly recognized as the number 1 powerhouse in the universe. Sensing that Lu Feng's aura had also surged to the extreme, Abyss Wolf's eyes flashed with a bloodthirsty madness. He finally moved. With a 4-fold increase in physical strength, an 8-fold increase in cultivation technique, and the activation of bloodline, Abyss Wolf definitely had a 100-fold increase in combat power at this moment. His comprehension on the path of martial arts had also entered the boundary of the realm and wasn't any weaker than Lu Feng. Sky Wolf Claw. As he raised his hand, he fused with the invincible attack of the giant Sky Wolf projection behind him, vast and mighty, destroying everything in its path. Even 100 ordinary heavens of slaughter would tremble in fear and be completely annihilated by such an attack. Lu Feng didn't say a word. He could feel the powerful force contained in this claw. Under the amplification of bloodline, Abyss Wolf's every attack had a 100-fold increase in strength. However, his experience and willpower were extremely rich. The actual strength of this strike was definitely 150 times more than that of a normal strike. Although amplification is still very important in a battle between warriors, the requirement for battle experience and willpower is even more important. Those are all unfathomable amplifications, but they have more power amplifications. However, you, Abyss Wolf, can achieve more than 150 times. It's naturally easier for me, Lu Feng. Although Lu Feng had a lot of battle experience in the past, most of it was brought from the endless illusions and wasn't that realistic. However, the hundreds of battles with 2 Tian Shun allowed his battle experience and willpower to increase rapidly. He wasn't any weaker than any of the geniuses of the same realm in the current universe. I am the Emperor. fused with all of Lu Feng's beliefs. This was Lu Feng's incomparably noble and most powerful peerless technique, although it had yet to reach the realm of great success. When this attack was fused with the heaven-reaching illusory figure of the human king behind him, it gave rise to the feeling of an unparalleled monarch descending upon the mortal world. He finally stopped holding back. Guangran Tianqing trembled slightly. His strength was many times stronger than Lu Feng's, but at this moment, after feeling Lu Feng's power, he actually had the urge to fight. The unprecedented six-fold amplification of the physical body and nine-fold amplification of the cultivation technique is already 54 times. The human king bloodline is recognized as the #1 bloodline since ancient times. His amplification is even more terrifying. At this moment, Lu Feng's casual attack has at least 150 times the combat strength. His attack is so terrifying, many existences could feel that Lu Feng's attack had far surpassed Abyss Wolf Sky Wolf Claw. This was definitely a killing power that had broken through 200 times. A difference of 50 times was extremely huge. Perhaps in front of those heaven-defying evildoers, countless battle willpower could make up for it. However, Abyss Wolf wasn't such a heaven-defying evildoer, and Lu Feng wasn't someone he could easily close the gap between. Therefore, a collision occurred. "I am the Emperor, kill. Skywolf Claw, kill." There was an endless uproar, and the entire audience was shocked. The shocking collision of auras sent everything in the arena flying. This terrifying massacre grounds, which had a diameter of more than 100,000 meters, formed an endless storm that stirred up the clouds and obscured the stars and moon. Suddenly, everyone saw the entire arena slowly shatter. Although it was only a slight shattering, this scene still shocked countless spectators. What powerful strength! These two people definitely have the strength of the Emperor of Massacre. Abyss Wolf is indeed worthy of being the #1 genius of the Sky Wolf tribe in the past 1,000 years. Although he might not be able to become a divine king in the future, with the Sky Wolf tribe's endless accumulation, becoming a virtual king or even a quasi-king level existence wouldn't be a problem. I really don't know how strong the person who defeated Abyss Wolf back then was. I'm afraid that even in the realm of the Emperor of Massacre, he's a peak powerhouse. Madness. The battle continued in a frenzy. At this moment, Abyss Wolf had already reached the peak of his realm. Although Lu Feng still hadn't used all his trump cards, his combat strength could also be considered heaven-defying. It was already considered very good that Abyss Wolf was able to fight Lu Feng to this extent. Sky Wolf kneels. Kneeling didn't mean that he would submit. Sky Wolf was a special kind of creature. The moment he kneeled was the moment he used his most powerful killing ability. His power skyrocketed once again. Vaguely, it was close to Lu Feng's 200 times amplification. Lu Feng finally understood why Abyss Wolf had the confidence to challenge him. With the Sky Wolf technique, which was passed down from the Sky Wolf tribe, Abyss Wolf's strength had increased by another level. It seems like I have to completely perfect unique one when I have time and start creating a martial technique that belongs to me. Martial techniques were skills that only star-level techniques could have. It could be said that the existence of martial techniques could allow a martialist to unleash 200% of his strength. The degree of terror was only below that of supreme techniques. Until now, Lu Feng had only created one move. I am the Emperor. Next, he had to calm down and start creating a new technique. He dodged slightly and increased his speed to the limit. Lu Feng had comprehended 10 realms. Although Abyss Wolf was abnormal and had comprehended 5 types of quality, he had only comprehended 1 realm. Facing Lu Feng, who had comprehended 10 realms, Abyss Wolf started to show signs of weakness. Chapter 201. Every time he used a technique, or even a martial technique, Lu Feng could still rely on the restraining realm to avoid it even if he didn't use any martial techniques. However, the price was also significant. His body had already suffered a lot of injuries. This was the first time Lu Feng had suffered such injuries since he unleashed his combat power. His eyes constantly scanned and observed the trajectory of Abyss Wolf's martial techniques. Gradually, Lu Feng seemed to have entered a wonderful state. This state was called the Battle Will. He actually entered the Battle Will. What a terrifying comprehension. The Battle Will. When Lu Feng first demonstrated it at the Cymbidium, he was once valued by the teachers of the Federal University. Dean Wan even gave Lu Feng a lot of privileges because of this. However, they still underestimated the terror of the Battle Will. The Battle Will wasn't just a gateway to the gods. His true terror was the vigorous power of the Battle Will in battle. He could easily kill the heavens and earth and could exert double his combat power. However, the most frightening thing wasn't the increase in combat power. The most powerful aspect of the Battle Will was comprehension. His eyes became brighter and brighter. In the next moment, after facing the Sky Wolf's bend knee, the most powerful Sky Wolf's devour that Abyss Wolf had comprehended so far, Lu Feng was completely shaken. An endless noble and majestic emperor's chi was born. It didn't originate from Lu Feng's bloodline, nor was it carried in his soul. This was the gift of fate. It was the true innate nobility. It was the noblest that far surpassed any inheritance. I am the emperor. I am the emperor. I'm still the emperor. However, this time, I am the emperor. It was completely different. Lu Feng's emperor's power made people tremble in fear. This punch was like the arrival of the divine king from the nine heavens. It was integrated into Lu Feng's punch. At this moment, Lu Feng was the most extreme existence in the world. Emperor, emperor, I am the emperor. With a loud collision, the heavens and earth shattered. Dust flew everywhere, and the faces of the strong changed. Give me, suppress. Amidst the mystery of the collision, amidst the dust that filled the sky, a loud roar reverberated throughout the world. When this voice came out, it made people feel endless fear. Yes, Lu Feng. This voice was Lu Feng's because the only thing that could make people feel like they were submitting to him was the bloodline of the human monarch, the peerless monster that had fought his way to the god of slaughter, Lu Feng. A figure flew out and crashed heavily onto the ground. The dust that filled the sky gradually settled. Many existences looked at the Abyss Wolf on the ground and took a deep breath. At this moment, Abyss Wolf was simply too miserable. Blood was flowing out of his entire body, and half of his arm was already twisted out of shape, making him look like a cripple. Many parts of his face were deformed, and his breathing was getting weaker and weaker. What terrifying combat strength! With the addition of his battle will and the deepening of his understanding of his cultivation method at the last moment, his battle prowess has directly broken through the shackles of 250 times. Even among the Emperor of Slaughter, very few people can achieve such a level of slaughter. Monster! Monster! This is a monster! The entire scene was silent. Looking at Lu Feng, who was slowly descending from the sky with blood flowing all over his body, a feeling of reverence rose in their hearts. Finally, Lu Feng stood on the ground. He looked at the Abyss Wolf, whose breathing was already extremely weak, and his eyes were filled with the majesty of Supreme Emperor. The bloodline of the human monarch has never withered. If there is anything that can surpass the human monarch, then it can only be the new monarch. And I, Lu Feng, am the new monarch. At this moment, I am the titled monarch. Do you all agree? Lu Feng's words reverberated, making everyone feel a boundless domineering aura. Arrogance, this was truly boundless arrogance. This was simply boundless arrogance. What kind of existence was the human monarch? It was an invincible existence that had already reached the pinnacle of legends. For example, the first divine king, the netherworld heavenly venerate, the strongest divine king, who had walked into the divine king's third realm, had their reputations completely suppressed by the human monarch. In this era, there were billions of experts in the universe, but there was only one human monarch. Now, Lu Feng actually said that he was the new monarch. He was the monarch, and he wanted to surpass the human monarch. Even though his current performance was abnormally terrifying, there was still no one who agreed with this statement. In everyone's eyes, Lu Feng was like a clown. However, Lu Feng turned a blind eye to these people. At this very moment, when he entered the battle intent, Lu Feng finally felt that kind of nobility. It was a nobility that surpassed everything. It was a kind of great monarch existence that the entire universe had to submit to and billions of gods had to bow down to. In this realm, he was the eternal monarch. Although he had the bloodline of the human monarch in Lu Feng's heart, the human monarch was also an expert in an invincible existence that had cultivated to become a living being. He was born the noblest, and he was supreme. Then he would surpass everything. Above his monarch head, even the heavens couldn't cover it. Even the Tao couldn't be at the same level. Lu Feng swept his gaze and looked in one direction. There stood 5 existences quietly. They were also at the advanced warrior realm, but they exuded a kind of supreme aura. They were all young paragons, recognized by the universe as young paragons. They were the 5 emperors of massacre left behind in the massacre abyss. With a light step, Lu Feng stepped over the dying abyss wolf and stepped on the void to arrive at the center of the arena. What a terrifying comprehension ability. The battle earlier actually allowed him to deepen his comprehension of the realm a step further. He's not even at the warrior realm, but he can actually walk on air. No, he's not walking on air. He's walking on air. How terrifying, really terrifying. The gods of massacre exclaimed, unable to describe the agitation in their hearts at this moment. Finally, Lu Fenglai arrived in front of the 5 emperors of massacre, who were at the advanced warrior realm. He looked at the strangely profound people in front of him and revealed a cold smile. Are you all willing to submit to me and respect me as Emperor? To become the Emperor of Massacre, one had to battle with the god of massacre and display a sufficiently powerful realm during the battle. Then, one would be recognized by the Emperor of Massacre of this realm and finally become the Emperor of Massacre. Normally, there would be 5 to 7 battles. The most important thing to become the Emperor of Massacre was to gain the recognition of the Emperors of Massacre. However, these 5 battles also couldn't be lost. The Emperor of Massacre was a young paragon. If one lost to the god of massacre, then what kind of paragon was he? What qualifications did he have to become the Emperor of Massacre? Lu Feng had only defeated one god of massacre, although the Abyss Wolf was ranked 2nd among all the gods of massacre. However, everyone believed that if Lu Feng hadn't entered the battle intent at the crucial moment, it would have been difficult for him to win. The fact that Luo Yunyang had actually said such a thing made everyone speechless. A foreign emperor of massacre glanced at Lu Feng. Finally, a faint expression appeared on his face. This was mockery, endless mockery. I originally thought that someone with the human monarch bloodline would be an exceptional powerhouse. However, it seems like I was wrong. What kind of arrogant person is this? What right do you have to make me recognize you? The other 4 emperors of massacre nodded their heads gently. Their expressions were the same. If Lu Feng had entered the battle intent and destroyed the Abyss Wolf, these people would have reluctantly acknowledged Lu Feng's identity as the Emperor of Massacre. But of all things, Lu Feng shouldn't have actually said that kind of thing. Although Lu Feng had the bloodline of the human monarch, and this was considered a matter of the Lu family, the human monarch was no longer the ancestor of the Lu family. He had already become a synonym for this era of civilization. He was the greatest and most invincible symbol. Lu Feng's words had already provoked the dignity of all powerhouses. If Lu Feng's desire to surpass the human monarch had made them feel uncomfortable, then Lu Feng's unparalleled strength had infuriated the 5 emperors of massacre. Thus, they no longer cared about the Lu family's status as a direct descendant. They no longer cared about the Lu family's patriarch hidden in the void. Lu Feng, you think too much. Although your strength is not bad and you have barely entered the realm of the Emperor of Massacre, your heart is really arrogant. What right do you have to be called a young paragon? What right do you have to make us recognize you? The underworld race's Emperor of Massacre didn't ridicule Lu Feng excessively. Instead, he spoke his mind. At the moment, everyone was silent. The people gathered here were all descendants of true aristocrats. The total number of Emperors of Massacre of the four major grades added up to more than 20 people. Besides them, there were also exceptional powerhouses who had awakened and were hidden in the void, watching everything unfold. It could be said that Lu Feng would have no problem becoming Emperor of Massacre this time. But what he said just now put himself in an extreme position, making his hopes slim. Everyone was looking at Lu Feng, waiting for his reply. The Lu family's patriarch, who was hidden in the void, frowned. He had never met Lu Feng before, but he had heard about Lu Feng from his family. Thus, he could be considered to have understood Lu Feng. However, the Lu Feng he knew and the Lu Feng before him were two completely different people. Although your aptitude is the highest in the history of the Lu family, and you're the closest to the primogenitor human monarch, you are still very weak. Lu Feng, you are really too insolent this time. You're still only close. My primogenitor, human monarch strength, is not something you can understand. The Lu family's patriarch sighed deeply. As a descendant of the primogenitor human monarch, he was well aware of his strength. However, Lu Feng, who hadn't grown up in the Lu family, didn't know this. This was probably the main reason why Lu Feng had said such a thing. This time, powerhouses from every race are watching. I'm afraid that the Lu family is going to be humiliated this time. Forget it, forget it. You're still young after all. Let's end it this time. Finally, the Lu family's patriarch decided to appear and end this farce. If this continued, who knew what kind of heaven-shaking words Lu Feng would have? Only the Lu family would be humiliated like that. However, just as the Lu family's patriarch was about to appear, an immense might descended. It was a terrifying aura that surpassed any imagination. It was indescribable and horrifying. At that moment, the entire massacre star trembled, as if it was in danger of collapsing at any moment. Many existences were horrified and looked at the horizon in disbelief. The same was true for the Almighties who had been hiding. They were familiar with this aura, as they had felt it many times before. They had originally thought that he wouldn't return after leaving. However, no one had expected that he would actually return. Xiaofeng, well done. The primogenitor, human monarch, has already lost his composure in the past. We are the ones in charge in this generation. Even if he is the primogenitor of the Lu family, why can't we surpass him? My son, I believe in you. Chapter 202. A figure slowly descended from the void. It was an endless and wide crack. The figure slowly walked out of the crack and landed on a massacre star. Insolence, endless insolence. Overbearing, frighteningly overbearing. It's him. It's actually him. He's back from 30 years ago. At this moment, almost everyone in the field recognized the figure. In the massacre star, his existence was too powerful. He was the true idol of a younger generation. There were very few who didn't recognize him. Back then, he killed until time and space trembled and until time lost its light. He used killing and blood to forge his eternal glory. The Massacre King. He obtained the title of Massacre King in the past 800 years. He's the supreme of the younger generation and has the potential to become the divine king. Actually, the title of Massacre King is the most suitable for him. He's the one who deserves it. During the gathering of the myriad clans, he slaughtered the younger generation of a myriad of clans by himself, and he used the blood of countless gods to establish his inextinguishable reputation. Godslayer Lu Tao. At this moment, when Lu Feng was being questioned by billions of people, Lu Feng's father, the great supreme, Godslayer Lu Tao, descended. You're actually the son of Godslayer. The human king, after all, was only a legend that had already become a myth. Not to mention the younger generation, even those of the older generation rarely knew of the terror of the human king. However, Lu Tao, they all clearly understood. It could be said that among the billions of races in the universe, There were very few geniuses of the younger generation who didn't know about Lu Tao. This was the fame forged by blood and killing. It was the unparalleled immortality of one person and one punch. Countless people regarded Lu Tao as their idol and followed the trail of Lu Tao. However, only now did they know that the bloodline of the Lu family in front of them, the boundlessly arrogant young man, was actually the bloodline of Godslayer. This was hard to believe. His Majesty Godslayer, if it was you who said those words, then perhaps we could reluctantly believe it. But for your child, I simply cannot believe it. You are known as the most talented person in the universe in the past 500 years. Your strength has been witnessed by many. Many existences have said that you are the most likely existence to reach the level of the universe's strongest divine king. But that is only you. I can't believe that your son has such qualifications. An emperor of massacre spoke up. Even though his tone was one of worship, his words were filled with doubt. Although Lu Tao was their idol, any genius would believe that they were the strongest, let alone these peerless monsters. They believed in Lu Tao's invincibility, but they didn't believe in Lu Feng's strength. Hearing this, everyone looked up at the sky, at the incomparably domineering and imposing figure. Lu Tao didn't answer. He didn't even look at him. He just turned around and looked at the terrifying spatial crack that hadn't closed yet. Suddenly, he smiled faintly and said, "Dear, someone is suspecting our son." The moment his voice fell, an equally terrifying aura that made the massacre star tremble once again spread. Slowly, a figure walked out of the spatial crack. That kind of untainted beauty, that kind of peerlessly enchanting beauty. That extremely beautiful face was intoxicating, and the aura of a banished immortal made people revere it. When they saw this figure, countless people took a deep breath. The way they looked at Lu Feng changed once again. Many people had already recognized who that figure was, the peerless emperor of massacre 30 years ago, Emperor Wei. The person who had descended was Yin Chenwei, Lu Tao's wife and Lu Feng's mother. The husband and wife pair, one king and one emperor, shocked the world. Both of them had the most precious bloodlines, and Lu Feng was the fusion of their bloodlines. This was hard to believe. Looking at the two people in the sky, Lu Feng's cold eyes showed a hint of warmth for the first time. The corners of his mouth curved into a perfect smile. "Dad, Mom." When they heard Lu Feng's call, Lu Tao and Yin Chenwei's eyes showed a doting look. However, in the next moment, Yin Chenwei's expression changed. It was a kind of coldness that was exactly the same as Lu Feng's. Her voice was so beautiful that it left one lingering in the aftertaste of her voice. However, the words that came out of her mouth were horrifying. "Hubby, since there are people who are not convinced, then let's use your method to convince them, the method to kill a god." Everyone was slightly taken aback. However, in the next moment, their expressions changed drastically. There was only one way to kill a god, and that was to kill. Endless and boundless killing. Killing a god was an existence with unparalleled combat strength. Now that he had stepped into the celestial god realm, it was likely that only the hidden forces of the major clans could contend against such an invincible existence. However, at the instant when Lu Tao took a step forward and descended onto the battlefield, a voice stopped them. "Dad, Mom, I can do it myself." The one who spoke was Lu Feng. At this moment, Lu Feng was no longer looking at the sky. He was only looking at the 5 high-level warrior-level emperors of massacre in front of him. Lu Feng's pride did not need help from others, even if those people were his parents. Looking at Lu Feng, Lu Tao, and Yin Chenwei all showed strange expressions. They had never seen Lu Feng like this. The two of them had watched Lu Feng grow up, and it could be said that they were incomparably familiar with Lu Feng. However, at this moment, Lu Feng made them feel like he was a stranger. Once again, everyone's eyes were focused on Lu Feng. At this moment, he was truly the focus of everyone's attention. Lu Feng saw that their expressions had changed. Finally, he spoke slowly. "Just now, you misheard me. I didn't want you to acknowledge me. This time, I want to be conferred the title of a new emperor. My title is the Emperor. What I want is for you to submit." Everyone was stunned. Everyone thought that Lu Feng was going to admit defeat. He wanted to use the name of his parents to make these people acknowledge his identity as the Emperor of Massacre. However, at this moment, when Lu Feng said it again, everyone couldn't help but be stunned again. Submit? He was asking the 5 Emperors of Slaughter to submit to him. Was Lu Feng stupid? This was the only thought in everyone's mind. However, unlike these people, the 5 Emperors of Massacre, who had faced Lu Feng directly, didn't think so. At this moment, countless drops of cold sweat flowed down their cheeks. Their eyes were filled with disbelief. As existences who had faced Lu Feng directly, their feelings couldn't be understood by anyone. At this moment, Lu Feng seemed to have changed into a different person. He was no longer the Lu Feng from before. Endless nobility and the mighty will of an emperor kept invading their hearts, making them feel the urge to submit completely. Lu Feng didn't say anything as he watched the constantly changing expressions of the 5 people. However, his heart was filled with a strange feeling. When he had entered the battle state and completely condensed his "I am the Emperor," Lu Feng felt that he had changed. Or perhaps the current him was the real him. He should have been an incomparably noble and mighty existence in the first place. The appearance of the sky-piercing Fudu had made Lu Feng feel that he had already started to change slowly. The awakening of the invincible bloodline and countless powerful advancements had made his heart gradually transform. However, Lu Feng understood that regardless of whether it was the crazy Lu Feng or the sharp-edged Lu Feng, they weren't him. The real him had never appeared. All the craziness, sharpness, humility, and serenity had only been his appearance. Lu Feng had been at a loss. He had realized that he couldn't find the real him. However, when he had stepped into Dao Songtian's inner world and entered the Dao at a young age, Lu Feng had gradually found himself. Gradually, he had seen the real him from a mystery. Although it had only been a moment, Lu Feng had also seen the first time his mind had materialized. He saw the vision of everything. Dao Songtian didn't know any of this. No one knew that at that moment, Lu Feng was actually clear-headed, standing at the top of the universe, looking down on billions of living beings. Billions of gods as his body, countless immortals and demons as his bones, the truth of time and space as his eyes, and fate as his soul. This was the true face of Lu Feng. He didn't know what he was hiding. However, at that moment, Lu Feng clearly knew that he should have been like that. He should be the greatest starting point of everything since ancient times, the ultimate end of everything. Therefore, from that moment on, Lu Feng had awakened. Back then, when Lu Feng had suspected that everything was just an illusion, he had collided with those eternal wills during the God of Massacre's test. He had crushed them and completely suppressed them. The nobility in the depths of his life and the majesty of an emperor had allowed him to stand up again. It had made him understand that he was the greatest nobility that not even fate could dictate. From that moment on, Lu Feng had finally found the real him. That should be him as an emperor. Perhaps it wasn't so obvious during normal times, but the moment the battle began, everything that Lu Feng had hidden was finally completely awakened. That was the reason why all those words were spoken. That was the reason why the 5 great massacre emperors were willing to submit to him. Gradually, many people began to feel the strangeness of the situation. They looked at the 5 emperors of slaughter, whose faces were constantly contorted and revealed strange expressions. Finally, it seemed that they could no longer bear such an atmosphere. A foreign race's emperor of massacre erupted. An aura that could shake everything rose from the ground, crushing the wind and clouds, and suppressing the earth. Lu Feng, I am the Emperor of Massacre. I am the greatest and peerless of all time. Even the King of Massacre can't make me submit. You, an existence who hasn't even become the Emperor of Massacre, what qualifications do you have to make me submit? You can't. You can't. Even your father, the legendary great god of Massacre, who was recognized as the universe's #1 talent in the past 500 years, is only qualified to be our idol. He can't possibly make us submit and revere him as an emperor. As the first slaughtering emperor went berserk, the remaining 4 slaughtering emperors also went berserk. Their auras continued to rise. When they reached the peak, each of their auras had already surpassed Lu Feng and Yuan Lang's when they were fighting against each other. This is the true emperor of massacre. He is the emperor of massacre who has experienced endless battles. This Lu Feng wants to use his parents' authority to force them to submit to him. This is absolutely impossible. Every emperor of massacre has their own dignity. How can they submit to someone else? I'd like to see how the son of the god of massacre will end this time. Outside the void, a few ancient almighties were communicating through their minds. Their strength was terrifying. Although they were no longer Lu Tao's match, the gap between them was very small. They didn't like Lu Tao very much. Therefore, these ancient almighties were more than happy to see Lu Tao's son humiliate himself. All the attention, including the Almighty's divine consciousness, was focused on Lu Feng. It could be said that Lu Feng looked really ugly at this moment. In everyone's opinion, Lu Feng intended to use his parents' prestige to oppress others. Unfortunately, his way of thinking was too simple, and his way of doing things was too arrogant. If he had used the power of Lu Tao's arrival, perhaps a few people would have taken a step forward and acknowledged Lu Feng's position as emperor. However, now that Lu Feng had said that he would submit, everything could no longer be undone. Chapter 203. Ignorant. How ignorant? Does he think he can make the Emperor of Massacre submit by borrowing the power of his parents? He's too naive. This time, it's not just the Lu family who will be embarrassed. I'm afraid even Emperor Slayer and Emperor Wei will be embarrassed together. It wasn't just one expert who was discussing. The voices gradually gathered and grew louder. They weren't too afraid of God Slayer. After all, this was the Massacre Abyss. Moreover, they were all from powerful clans and forces. As long as they didn't provoke God Slayer too much, they weren't afraid of him. The discussions below could no longer be suppressed. At this moment, Emperor Wei's cold snort reverberated throughout the area, causing the voices to vanish instantly. Yin Shenwei's expression became even colder. Those who were familiar with her knew that this was a sign that this beautiful Emperor of Massacre was about to unleash her wrath. Wife, it's not worth it to be angry with them. Our son is not someone that these people can judge or criticize. They will see the true face of Xiaofeng. In this world, if there was anyone who truly knew how terrifying Lu Feng was, it would be Lu Tao. He was definitely the first. He knew that Lu Feng's trump card wasn't just the power of the human king's bloodline. Previously, when he faced the will of the divine king of the netherworld, the great ancient demon that he awakened was absolutely terrifying. That kind of power was actually comparable to the power of the human king's bloodline. Although he didn't know how Lu Feng got it, Lu Tao knew that once Lu Feng really used the power of the great demon, no one in the realm of the Emperor of Massacre would be a match for him. After this, I'll let Xiaofeng go into seclusion and cultivate properly in the family. Once he truly masters the scripture of the human king, then surpassing me in the past will be a cinch. Everyone looked at Lu Feng with ridicule. They wanted to see how he was going to deal with this. However, in the face of these ridicule and doubts, Lu Feng only smiled. It was a cold, murderous smile. It was a smile that made people tremble with just one look. The majesty of the king. No provocation, no blasphemy. Since you aren't willing to submit, the only thing I can do is to suppress you. Suppress? Someone who was barely on the verge of becoming the Emperor of Massacre actually said that he wanted to suppress him, trying to suppress the 5 true Emperors of Slaughter? What a joke. What a joke. However, just as everyone wanted to laugh, the smiles on their faces suddenly froze. That was because at this moment, Lu Feng had once again begun to improve endlessly. His bloodline power. Just how rich is this bloodline power? Just now, it wasn't the power of his bloodline that was completely boiling. Even when his father killed the king, he could barely reach this level of strength. At that time, King Slayer was already a warrior at the peak of the perfect stage. Could it be that this Lu Feng's bloodline is so dense that his father is going to kill the king? Strong and majestic, the illusory figure of the human king behind Lu Feng actually became more and more intense, as if it was going to descend at any time. At this moment, a kind of terrifying majesty slowly transmitted from that illusory figure. It actually started to affect all operations. When the bloodline reached a certain level of density, it could borrow the projection of the bloodline's source power across endless time and space. This wasn't a legend. Many evildoers with incomparably dense bloodlines had already proven this point. However, the human king's bloodline could borrow the projection of the human king's power. This had never happened before. The human king was the #1 king since ancient times in this era. He was the most powerful and invincible existence. His bloodline power was the #1 in the universe. The degree of strength was unimaginable. The terrifying degree of amplification was almost equivalent to the terror of a late-stage psyche master. However, it was precisely because of the terror of the human king's bloodline that until now, there had never been a human king of the Lu family who could summon the descent of the human king's will. Even Lu Tao back then couldn't, but now they saw it. Lu Feng, this previously incomparably arrogant existence, actually summoned the descent of the human king's will. At this moment, Lu Feng's power increased again. It was a terrifying increase. The previous him was barely at the edge of the Emperor of Massacre. In the hearts of many existences, Lu Feng was only able to defeat the Abyss Wolf by relying on temporarily entering the battle will. But now no one thought so anymore. This kind of power boost was more than twice as powerful as before. The current Lu Feng was enough to stand in the realm of the Emperor of Massacre. He could even be considered the most powerful Emperor of Massacre. The will of an emperor was extremely dense at this moment. Lu Feng swept his gaze across and looked at all the spectators around him. No matter what realm the Emperor of Massacre was, no matter how terrifying the powerhouse was, they all trembled slightly under Lu Feng's gaze. They understood that the current Lu Feng was no longer the simple Lu Feng from before. He had already descended the will of the human king into his body. Although it was just a trace, the existence of the human king was absolutely not something that any deity could imagine. I am the emperor. All of you submit. Finally, Lu Feng reached out a finger and lightly tapped, making the entire sky tremble. The 5 emperors of Massacre in front of him were all subjected to the most terrifying suppression on the spiritual level. Cold sweat poured down like water, and their bodies trembled. In their opinion, the current Lu Feng was too honorable, too great. It actually made them have the impulse to completely submit to him. I was born great, the pinnacle genius of my race. Among my peers, who can compete with me? Looking at the billions of races in the universe, I am also one of the most monstrous existences. Lu Feng, you only borrowed the power of the ancestor. What qualifications do you have to make me submit and make you my emperor? Dream on. You're dreaming. They were the emperors of Massacre. Even if it was the human king, he was only their idol. They did not need to, could not submit. They could not endure it any longer. Finally, after their auras soared to the extreme, one of the emperors of Massacre made his move. This move was a powerful martial skill, a supreme strike that could tear apart the dome of the sky. The berserk power shattered the void, causing the entire earth to tremble endlessly. This was a supreme strike of slaughter, a peerless strike that broke through in despair. The cold light in Lu Feng's eyes became more and more obvious, almost becoming solid. His dignity was once again being challenged endlessly. So he wanted to kill, suppress. He softly spat out 2 words. In the next moment, Lu Feng seemed to fuse with the phantom. The human king's power was borrowed by Lu Feng, and a giant palm fell down from the sky. There was no martial skill, no power, but this strike had a terrifying power that made one despair. The powerful strike of the foreign race's Emperor of Massacre, facing that heaven-reaching phantom, had no way to do anything. In an instant, a figure flew out, crashing into the stands with a terrifying speed, stirring up dust that filled the sky, boundless and unrestrained. Everyone was completely dumbfounded. They looked in Lu Feng's direction, filled with an indescribable color. Such a strike was simply too horrifying. This is the human king's bloodline? This is the terror of the human king's bloodline. Borrowing the human king's will, fusing with the phantom. At this moment, he is the human king. At this moment, he is invincible. At this moment, who can resist him? Who can resist him? A stretch of silence. These people did not think that Lu Feng could actually stimulate the human king's bloodline to such a degree. Since ancient times, those with the divine king's bloodline, those who could borrow the divine king's will, were all peerless and unparalleled existences. This was because fighting with them was equivalent to fighting with the divine king's will, although it was only a tiny bit of it. But what kind of supreme existence was the divine king? Even if it was only the tiniest bit, it was not something that anyone could bear. In the endless void, the Lu family's ancestor was laughing crazily at this moment. He looked in Lu Feng's direction, and all his previous dissatisfaction had vanished. Now, there was only endless madness. Human king's bloodline. This is the most powerful human king's bloodline in the history of our Lu family. Finally, we have waited for this day. He, Lu Feng, can finally induce the appearance of the human king's will. If one day he, Lu Feng, can set foot in the divine king's realm, then he will be equivalent to the rebirth of the human king. He will be another invincible progenitor of the human king. Among those of the same generation, who can rival him? Who can rival him? Invincible. This is invincible. This is a king. Among those of the same generation, he will be crowned a king. At this moment, Lu Feng was a king, an emperor. The 5 emperors of Massacre might have been invincible existences in the past, but when faced with Lu Feng's current state, they were just a joke. The Emperor of Massacre that had been sent flying earlier slowly flew over. However, there was still an indescribable fear on his face. He looked at Lu Feng, full of unwillingness. He stood in his previous position again and felt Lu Feng's invincible will, which was enough to suppress heaven and earth. His heart started to sink completely into madness. He looked at the 4 emperors of Massacre around him, who were equally frightened, and spoke slowly with endless madness. We are all the divine king's bloodline. We are all lineal inheritors, and we are incomparably noble by nature. This battle is no longer about victory or defeat. This is a battle for our dignity. So burn. Let our noble blood be equally crazy. The 4 emperors of Massacre nodded gently. Now, it was no longer a matter of whether they recognized Lu Feng as a newly ascended emperor or not. It was a battle for their glory. They were all of the divine king's lineal blood. How could they allow themselves to be inferior? So, the real combustion, the final battle, the 5 emperors of Massacre carried out their final frenzy. Their greatest trump card, the power of their bloodline, finally began to be completely shaken and burned completely. In a haze, 5 terrifying visions that could overpower heaven and earth were born. It was as if they had crossed the river of time and space to descend into this world. The 5 divine kings' lineal blood, the 5 divine kings' incarnations. Although they are not like Lu Feng, who can summon the will of the human king, they are already existences with the richest bloodline. This time, it is the 5 divine king, the glorious divine king, the silent divine king, the troubled times of the divine king, the martial dramas of the divine king, and the ancient divine king. Their descendants have finally brought their majesty to this world once again. Chapter 204. The phantoms of the 5 divine kings appeared, standing behind the 5 emperors of slaughter. and in front of them, there was only one person, and that was Lu Feng. The 5 divine kings collided with the first divine king since time immemorial. This battle seemed to be no longer a battle between the younger generation. Lu Feng, at this moment, you indeed have the strength to be invincible among your peers. But you're still too far away from making us submit. You can't. The words of one of the emperors of slaughter spread throughout the world, making everyone nod lightly. But facing this, Lu Feng still smiled mockingly. In the next instant, he moved, an invincible vision. The omnipotent human king behind him seemed to have become one with him. Lu Feng's movements were the human king's movements. Every time Lu Feng punched, every time he killed, it was supported by the human king's will. Any attack had to surpass the previous strongest attack. Suppress, suppress, suppress. Lu Feng also went crazy. After the 5 emperors of slaughter ignited their bloodline power, they could no longer be mentioned in the same breath. They were all young sovereigns. In a pinnacle race like the human race, they were all invincible existences of their generation. But now, these 5 invincible existences were working together to resist Lu Feng's existence. 3 consecutive strikes of terrifying power sent the 3 emperors of massacre flying far away. But this kind of power was not enough to seriously injure them. All of a sudden, the other 2 terrifying attacks had arrived and landed on Lu Feng's body. Countless drops of golden blood were as resplendent as a flower at this moment, quiet and beautiful. The power of the human king's bloodline was rapidly circulating. In an instant, the injury was healed, but everyone could feel that Lu Feng's power was decreasing bit by bit. A furious roar pierced through the sky. With a hand holding up the sky, Lu Feng punched down again. It seemed to ignore any kind of slaughter, ignoring the divine king's terrifying martial technique. Sent flying, sent flying. He was constantly sent flying. When had the 5 slaughter emperors ever been humiliated like this? They could only rely on their teamwork to attack Lu Feng's body. At other times, they could only wander around the periphery, unable to do anything. Lu Feng, who ignited a peak sovereign personage bloodline, is simply too strong. Among the Emperor of Slaughter, he was the only one with such strength. I'm afraid that other than the King of Massacre, there's no one else who can rival him. The 5 great monarchs are the supreme beings of the younger generation. In any race, they would be the pinnacle geniuses of this generation, the most brilliant brilliance. However, at this moment, even though the 5 of them had joined forces, they were still sent flying by Lu Feng. Sad. No matter what, it's enough that a God-slayer has appeared among the humans. We will definitely not allow another emperor to appear. There may not be a chance in the slaughter abyss, and there may not be a great chance in the human race either. However, as long as he takes a step out of the galaxy, we must kill him at all costs. This Lu Feng, as long as he reaches the peak of the virtual king and reaches the quasi-king realm, I'm afraid he'll be a supreme, otherworldly supreme, being capable of suppressing an ordinary divine king. Our race will definitely not allow such a combat power to appear among the humans. Obliterate. Obliterate. Think of all ways to completely obliterate him. Many foreign race beings who had seen everything about Lu Feng began to use all kinds of secret techniques to transmit information. The instructions they received were all the same. That was to obliterate him. They had to completely obliterate Lu Feng at all costs. In the past, a Godslayer caused the younger generation of the billions of races in the universe to tremble in fear. If the Netherworld King hadn't forcefully revived and cut off Lu Tao's path to becoming a divine king at the last moment, then in the future, the human race would have very likely produced an existence infinitely close to being invincible, close to becoming a sovereign personage. This is something the other races don't want to see, something they can't see. This Lu Feng's bloodline seems to be even more powerful and rich than Lu Tao's. Then his danger level will increase even more. Since that's the case, we can't let him step into the quasi-king realm or even the virtual king realm. Therefore, we must do everything we can to completely obliterate him as long as we find an opportunity. At this moment, when Lu Feng's bloodline power was fully released in the hearts of many foreign race beings, his danger level had even surpassed his father, Lu Tao, the most talented person in the past 500 years. In the sky, the battle had already entered a frenzied state. Lu Feng was crazy, as if he was the giant sovereign personage projection. Every punch was abnormally deep and filled with absolute violence. The 5 Emperors of Massacre were the same. They were also crazed to the extreme. After igniting the bloodline of their respective ancestors, the Divine King, their strength also began to increase continuously. Lu Feng's body had already been pierced through countless holes. Dripping with blood, he looked like a corpse. The sovereign personage's bloodline power flashed continuously, but the speed of repair could no longer keep up with the speed of destruction. His eyes were ferocious, Lu Feng's bloodthirsty sky. Kill. Suppress for me. It was another powerful and violent strike, easily suppressing a king of massacre who had just arrived from the void in the land of massacre. Millions of dust clouds were stirred up, causing this super-killing ground that could withstand the battle of perfect Emperors of Massacre to slowly crack. With great difficulty, the Emperor of Massacre that had been smashed into pieces by Lu Feng on the ground struggled to crawl out. He had already been suppressed and sent flying by Lu Feng many times. If not for the fact that he had completely ignited the bloodline of the Divine King, he would probably have been smashed into pieces. But even so, he was still in an abnormally miserable state. Looking at the sky, where Lu Feng's golden blood had already filled the air, a complicated expression flashed across his eyes. In the next moment, with a roar, he actually soared into the sky again. The chaotic battle erupted once again. Qinwei, don't go. This is Xiaofeng's battle. If you take action, he won't be happy. Looking at Lu Feng, who seemed to have walked to the edge of the abyss of death, Yin Qinwei finally wanted to take action. She was a peak true god, an exceptional emperor of massacre at the level of a monster. Once she took action, she could easily change the operation of heaven and earth. However, the moment she took action, she was completely blocked by someone. And the person who blocked her was Lu Tao. Hearing Lu Tao's words, Yin Qinwei, who was about to fly into a rage, had a look of struggle in her eyes. However, she still raised her arm. Even if Xiaofeng blames me, I will still take action. He's my son. Even if he resents me for the rest of my life, I will not let him get hurt. After saying this, a powerful force was already mobilized. However, this time, it was Lu Tao who stopped her again. Lu Tao, what are you doing? Yin Qinwei's face was already cold. However, this time, her anger did not make Lu Tao retreat. His arm pressed down on Yin Qinwei, but in his eyes, there was only the battle in the distance. Qinwei, from the moment Xiaofeng chose to walk on this path, everything was already destined. You can help him once, twice. Can you help him forever? Xiaofeng's future. It is not something you can imagine. I know that he's hiding a lot of secrets. Even I can't imagine what his future will be like. This is a difficult path of massacre. Countless thorns and bumps are everywhere. Death and oblivion will constantly intertwine. This time is Xiaofeng's own choice. You, let him be willful for once. Yin Qinwei was stunned. She turned around and looked at Lu Feng, who was in an extremely miserable state on the battlefield, yet she'd already stopped all her actions. Because she'd seen the light that flickered without end within Lu Feng's eyes. Perhaps it was called madness in the eyes of others, but Yin Qinwei, who'd watched Lu Feng grow up, knew that it was persistence. It was unyieldingness. The hidden dragon of the 9 heavens is bound to the abyss. The dark parasol tree has been broken into the sky. Lu Feng was a true dragon of the 9 heavens that was bound in a boundless abyss. In the past, he was extremely weak and had no natural talent in any aspect, and he was an extremely ordinary person. But it was different now. He'd already awakened the bloodline of the first mortal king, and he'd shattered the dark parasol's abyss with a single leap. Henceforth, He would roam the 9 heavens and command the sky. Perhaps what you said is right. Yin Chunwei sighed deeply as she looked at the child who was completely covered in golden blood, and her eyes revealed an expression of extreme pity. But in the end, she didn't make a move. Lu Tao smiled lightly when he sensed the change in his wife, and there was only extreme determination in his eyes. Chunwei, actually, you don't understand Xiaofeng. I wasn't joking when I said that his future is even vaster than mine, and it's the truth. He's probably going to erupt next, right? The situation at the scene took a sudden turn for the worse. The 5 great emperors of slaughter utilized the martial skills of the Divine King, and their power rose explosively once more. On the other hand, even though Lu Feng was able to firmly suppress them in a single battle, and he was even able to easily resist and suppress 2 of them, he was already powerless when their numbers increased to 5. At the beginning, Lu Feng was still able to rely on his formidable eruption to completely suppress them, but as the battle continued, he became more and more powerless. His heavily injured body faintly started to become difficult to even resist one of the emperors of slaughter. Numerous existences sighed lightly as they watched everything that occurred at the scene. No wonder he dares to threaten to surpass the human king. Although there have been countless extreme, monstrous geniuses in many eras who have made such a grand wish, there hasn't been such an existence until now. The human king will always be the human king. However, this Lu Feng is really a little frightening. He's able to resist 5 great emperors by himself, and he's even able to suppress them at his current level. His strength is indeed a little unimaginable. Although the current him might not be enough to be titled the King of Slaughter, he's already an absolutely invincible existence among the emperors of slaughter. If he's given a little more time, he'll completely master the supreme code of the human king's bloodline, the human king scripture. I'm afraid he'll be another extreme, monstrous genius on par with the king's slayer. There was no need for the rest of the battle to continue. If Lu Feng had been able to directly suppress all of them at the beginning, then he would have had a slight chance of winning. Unfortunately, Lu Feng pursued too much of a strong suppression. He wanted to use absolute violence to completely destroy everything, and this was what led to his eventual defeat. After entering the martialist realm, he should be able to completely master the human king's cultivation techniques. When that happens, his combat strength will increase again. This time, there's really something to see. In the past, his father forged an immortal reputation by killing. Now, his son is actually just as domineering. There's less than 10 years until this year's convention of the myriad races. Who knows how far he'll progress in 10 years? Although Lu Feng's arrogance had angered many people, they couldn't help but sigh when they saw Lu Feng's defeat. After all, Lu Feng represented the human king's bloodline, which was the strongest in the current era. Even so, his defeat was still an honorable one. After all, his opponents were the direct descendants of the 5 divine king. They were the 5 great young paragons recognized by the universe. Who could take advantage of the 5 great young paragons? Being able to do so was already extremely terrifying. Famous in one battle, the current Lu Feng can be considered the number 1 person below the extreme monstrous geniuses. His name will definitely shake the entire galaxy and universe. With such strength, he's almost at the level of the King of Slaughter. If it's the King of Slaughter, being able to resist and suppress 3 emperors of slaughter and remain undefeated while being besieged by 5 emperors of slaughter is already the limit. Lu Feng is really not bad. Countless sighs stopped, as everything in the arena was about to end magnificently. Chapter 205. Right now, Lu Feng's entire body was completely submerged in the golden ocean. This was his blood, his noble blood of a human king. In his eyes, there was a kind of endless obsession and madness. But apart from this, his face was still so majestic, making people think of a supreme king. Finally, following the Emperor of Massacre's heaven-swallowing attack, Lu Feng directly fell to the ground. A huge crater with a diameter of 50 meters appeared on the ground, just like that. This was one of the 5 ultimate killing grounds. The materials here were incomparably solid, and even if the gods appeared, they couldn't damage too much. But these 6 high-level warriors had made this place so modeled. The prestige of the young Supremes was nothing more than this. The 5 young Supremes, once the bloodline is activated under the extreme eruption, they are definitely between the upheaval stage and the evolution stage. They are absolutely invincible in the evolution stage, but they can't win against the upheaval stage. And Lu Feng should be at the initial stage of the upheaval stage. This should be the upper limit of their strength. The king of the younger generation in the advanced warrior realm should have the strength to suppress an initial stage, upheaval stage. I think if Lu Feng has a human king technique or uses a supreme technique, he should enter the king realm for a short time. He is really not bad. Slowly climbing out of the deep crater. Lu Feng couldn't even stand now. The boiling blood was about to stop, and his strength had reached the limit. Fight again? Relying on the bloodline, he already didn't have the strength to fight anymore. If Lu Feng's trump card was like this, then as these spectators thought, it would end like this. Unfortunately, Lu Feng wasn't. He still had a trump card. There was an even more powerful existence. Originally, I didn't intend to use my final trump card, but now it seems that it's already impossible. At this point in the battle, Lu Feng had already understood everything. He finally understood Tu Tianxin's level. The young Tu Tianxin, that Tu Tianxin of the advanced warrior realm, wasn't the emperor of massacre in his imagination. He was the king of slaughter. Although his physical body only had a 3-fold increase, his combat strength was definitely on par with the king of massacre. As for Lu Feng, he could even suppress Tu Tianxin for a short period of time without using his final trump card. In that case, he definitely had the strength of the king of slaughter. Previously, Lu Feng only wanted to rely on the extreme activation of his bloodline so that he could fight against the 5 rulers and take advantage of the situation to break through. But now, it seemed that he had been too naive. The combined power of the 5 emperors of slaughter far surpassed that of a single king of slaughter. They weren't fighting him head-on at all. They were relying on time to slowly wear him down. However, this wasn't of much help to Lu Feng's breakthrough. Therefore, Lu Feng no longer held back. He had finally decided to reach the pinnacle of cultivation. Since you don't want to face me head-on, why don't you give me a chance? Then I will leave you with no choice. Lu Feng's voice was so obvious in this empty space. Everyone looked at Lu Feng in a daze. At their current level, they could even hear the slightest sound from 1,000 miles away. However, when Lu Feng said these words, they were doubting whether they had heard wrongly. He said, "This isn't his peak strength? Is this a joke? Joke. This was definitely a huge joke. Such combat strength, which could be said to be invincible under the king realm, was actually not his peak strength? Could it be that he's really a king realm? He actually has the combat strength of the king of slaughter. In the past 700 years, the number of emperors of slaughter that were born from the massacre abyss was in the thousands. Almost every year, a new emperor of slaughter was born. However, there were only 4 kings of slaughter. The king of slaughter was known as the supreme king among the younger generation. It also had another name, which was the divine king's potential. Now, Lu Feng actually said that his strength hadn't reached the pinnacle. He actually still had a trump card that he hadn't used. One had to know that he was now at the peak of the emperor of slaughter. Using a supreme technique could temporarily stop at the king of slaughter realm. Once he used his trump card, wouldn't that mean that he was really the king of slaughter? Slowly, Lu Feng forcefully propped up his broken body and finally stood up from the ground. His eyes were scarlet. However, everyone could see that it was an expression of endless madness and bloodlust. Seeing this scene, everyone was stunned. However, Lu Tao smiled. Tu Tianxin, who was far away in the endless space, also smiled. They knew that Lu Feng was finally no longer holding back and was going to use his strongest trump card. A shocking aura began to slowly appear. Behind Lu Feng, the huge phantom of the human king was already constantly blurring. Usually, the blurring of the phantom represented the exhaustion of the bloodline power and was no longer able to support the increase of that huge power. However, at this moment, there were people who really dared to think so. Because Lu Feng had said that he still had a trump card. The phantom of the human king had already become an endless blur. However, in the next moment, a voice appeared, resounding through the ancient firmament, intimidating everything in eternity. Great demon, true body, copper body, great demon. In the void, the phantom of the human king had completely faded. However, the moment Lu Feng's voice landed, that blurry phantom emitted a shocking power. In the position of that blurry face, two rays of light that could see through everything slowly appeared. Many existences knew that those were the positions of the eyes. Those were the eyes that were slowly opening. Everything around had already changed. The overbearing aura of the human king was still there, but it had added an even more terrifying majesty. That was a kind of chaos, a kind of eternity, a kind of invincible will to obliterate. Demon. At this moment, everyone unconsciously said the same word. They did not understand why they knew, but the moment they saw that phantom and that aura appeared, the same word unconsciously appeared in their minds. On his body, the golden color was even more conspicuous. However, in this golden color, there was a bronze color mixed in. Lu Feng's body began to gradually change. Although his overall appearance did not change in the slightest, everyone knew that Lu Feng had already transformed. When that bronze color appeared, he became even more terrifying, even more unfathomable. The power of the great demon was fully activated. The true essence of his bloodline was endlessly boiling. At this moment, Lu Feng shattered all shackles. This was his peak state when he fought with Tu Tianxin. In the past, he had not comprehended the realm, but by relying on this peak state, he was almost able to suppress Tu Tianxin, the king of massacre. Now, everything had entered the peak state, and he had taken another step on the path of martial arts. After the nobility of his heart and soul had condensed into greatness once again, Lu Feng was even more terrifying. The king of massacre. This is definitely the power of the king of massacre. This Lu Feng actually has the power of the king of massacre. The fifth one, in the massacre abyss, the fifth king of massacre. One family with two kings, the Lu family. Is this a sign that they are about to recover their former glory? The human king bloodline is finally about to reveal its sharpest fangs. Obliterate him. No matter what, we must obliterate him with everything we have. One family with two kings. Give the Lu family some time, and their Lu family can give birth to at least two other Path Supreme beings. At that time, in the entire universe, who can contend against the human king bloodline? Who can suppress the human king bloodline? Countless people were frightened and roaring. Even the foreign race experts hidden in the void revealed their sharp fangs at this moment. They had already decided to obliterate Lu Feng at all costs. In the past, the path of massacre, which had killed gods, had already suppressed the entire universe to the point that no one dared to call themselves a king. Now, Lu Feng, whose bloodline was even more terrifying, had appeared. It seemed like everything was about to repeat itself. They could not allow such a scene to happen again. Human King Palace, in the pure land of bliss. 10 terrifying existences slowly awakened. The laws of the universe were extinguished, space-time rotated, and time surrendered. The 10 of them were all peerless and unrivaled supreme experts. Their representatives were the symbols of all power. Just by existing, they meant that they were invincible. The great ancestor woke up and looked at the 10 people in front of him with a serious expression. You should already know everything. It's time to appear. The human king bloodline is not to be humiliated. Go. Do everything you can to ensure Lu Feng's safety. Teach all living beings who covet the human king bloodline an unforgettable lesson. The 10 terrifying existences slowly opened their eyes and nodded gently in the direction of the great ancestor. Then, 10 spatial cracks appeared. In an instant, the 10 of them disappeared. Teachers, he is the hope of humankind. He is the hope of the Psyche Master lineage to prove ourselves. Therefore, this time, I'm counting on you. In the realm of time, Dao Songtian had a respectful expression as he bowed to the 3 frozen stone coffins. As his voice fell, the 3 stone coffins suddenly opened. 3 old men with aged faces but incomparably benevolent expressions slowly walked out of the coffins. They nodded slightly and then began to enter the space-time turbulence. Seeing the 3 ancestors of the Federal University disappear, Dao Songtian's eyes shone brightly. He looked at the endless space-time and murmured, "Lu Feng, I won't let anything happen to you. The human race won't let anything happen to you. The lesson of killing a god is enough. The human race won't tolerate it a second time." A few ancient super life-bearing planets awakened with terrifying majesty. Those were all terrifying and invincible experts. As they awakened, the billions of humans on the life-bearing planets called out to their ancestors. Then, they tore through the void and completely disappeared into the endless sky. Old friends, I didn't expect a junior to wake all of us up. How rare, it can't be helped. Who asked him to have the ability to make me appear? The god-slaying war destroyed the hope of the human race. This time, we definitely can't let such a situation happen again. After more than 500 years of silence, these foreign races have forgotten the strength of the human race in the past. This time, the human race's revival will begin. The various experts of the Federation had already begun to move. Many ancient existences walked out of their decaying palaces. They were willing to go to war in order to protect Lu Feng. Apart from them, the other foreign races that received the news also did the same. Among them, the underworld race, which was close to the human race, even had 3 ancestors. Countless experts gathered in the direction of the dying galaxy. However, Lu Feng didn't know this now. He was really at his peak now. He had truly reached the peak of his strength. Chapter 206. The appearance of the bronze great demon body, the appearance of the great demon power, and the support of the great demon phantom caused Lu Feng's combat power to soar once again. Without a doubt, the current him had already surpassed the power he had when he collided with Tu Tian in the past. And Tu Tian was the king of massacre. Hence, the current Lu Feng was fully deserving of the title of king of massacre. The 5 emperors of massacre had looks of disbelief on their faces. When Lu Feng collided with the Abyss Wolf, Lu Feng was just a lucky person in their hearts. If he hadn't entered the battle consciousness, he probably wouldn't have been able to break through the Abyss Wolf's attack. At that time, Lu Feng should have been on the verge of becoming an emperor. And when Lu Feng said those arrogant words, these people treated Lu Feng, the Lu family, and even Lu Feng's parents, Slayer God and Queen Wei, as a joke. However, with Lu Feng's powerful outburst, when the bloodline power that even surpassed Lu Tao's boiled, these people finally understood how terrifying and powerful Lu Feng was. That was almost the combat power of the king of massacre. The power of one person going against the 5 emperors of massacre was unprecedented. However, Lu Feng did it, and he even resisted for such a long time. When Lu Feng was finally about to be defeated, everyone no longer had looks of ridicule on their faces. They understood that Lu Feng might not be able to become a terrifying supreme being like the human king, but once he reached the level of a supreme being in the universe, then relying on his human king bloodline, it was really possible for him to dominate an era. Just when everyone thought that everything was about to end beautifully, a sudden change occurred again. Everything happened so suddenly that it was unimaginable. Just when everyone thought that Lu Feng was still a little arrogant, Lu Feng used his own power to shut all the people who doubted him up. The king of massacre was the existence of the divine king's potential. He was the supreme being of the younger generation. Then he, Lu Feng, would be the pinnacle of the universe. He was an extreme, monstrous genius. The power of the great demon had never appeared before, but when it did, it caused the world to tremble. At this moment, Lu Feng was an emperor, a king, an emperor. However, he was a king who was filled with endless demonic nature. Under the support of the great demonic power and complete bloodline boil, all of his injuries were instantly restored to their original state. At this moment, Lu Feng had once again returned to his peak, a peak that was even more powerful than before. In an instant, he disappeared. The next moment, he appeared beside the Emperor of Massacre. When he punched out, no one could believe the power contained within it. This strike clearly didn't contain any of the Divine King's martial techniques, but the explosive power easily broke through the 300-fold limit. Without a doubt, before Lu Feng reached his peak, he could already send any king of slaughter flying with a single punch. At this moment, the massacring emperor, who was already in a weakened state, could not resist at all. He spat out a mouthful of blood and was sent flying. His body was on the verge of shattering. This punch was many times more terrifying than their powerful attacks. Against Lu Feng, they simply did not have the slightest bit of power to resist. As he stared coldly at the 4 remaining kings of Massacre in the sky, Lu Feng's eyes burned even more crazily. I've already reached one of my limits. If you still want to fight me using the same method as before, then you will definitely fail. Then, failure will be inevitable. Lu Feng was right. If they continued to divide their strength, they simply wouldn't have the slightest chance of victory. Against Lu Feng, who was at the King of Massacre realm, these weakened kings of Massacre had no way of fighting back. The King of Massacre, who had been almost crippled by Lu Feng, was the clearest example. After a moment of silence, Lu Feng said, "I will give you all a chance to clash head-on with me. Unleash your greatest strength and fight with me. Let me see what kind of ultimate power you have after going against my rule." Previously, when Lu Feng had asked them to submit instead of acknowledge him, everyone had thought that it was a joke. However, when Lu Feng unleashed his full power, they suddenly realized that everything should be like this. Lu Feng indeed had the absolute power to dominate the younger generation. When they heard this, the 4 kings of Massacre fell silent. They exchanged glances and finally saw the craziness and fighting spirit in each other's eyes. The King of Massacre from the Underworld tribe walked out and looked at Lu Feng. He said slowly, "King of Massacre, we never thought that you would actually be the King of Massacre, who is no weaker than your father." "Very good, very good. Lu Feng, regardless of whether you win this battle or not, I, Yuan Tong, acknowledge your strength. I, Skeleton, acknowledge your strength. I, Fei Qiong, acknowledge your strength. I, Dalan Lugu, acknowledge your strength." For voices came from the mouths of the 4 kings of Massacre. They had already acknowledged Lu Feng's status as the King of Massacre. They had already acknowledged that Lu Feng's title as the King of Massacre lived up to his name. "And I, Wan Ju, acknowledge your strength, Lu Feng." The King of Massacre, who had almost been killed by Lu Feng, finally stood up. He said his words with difficulty. Then he took out an ancient elixir and swallowed it. "Lu Feng, I will use my peak state to clash with you. This is my acknowledgement of you, my respect for you. It is also an explanation for me." Soon, the 4 slaughtering emperors did the same thing. The elixirs that they had used to fight for their lives were all swallowed. To them, although the elixirs were precious and not worth using in such a competition, they still used them against Lu Feng, the brand new King of Massacre, because an incomplete state was a sign of disrespect to the king. Even if they did not acknowledge Lu Feng as their ruler, they still gave enough respect to the strong. In an instant, the 5 kings of Massacre, who had taken the elixirs, returned to their peak state. At this moment, they were even a little stronger than before. Previously, they were already between the upheaval stage and the evolution stage martial artists. Now, after taking the elixirs, they definitely had the strength of upheaval stage beginner stage. The 6 people in the arena were all peak advanced warriors. but their true strength was enough to challenge any upheaval stage warrior. This was the kings of massacre, the terrifying, peerless evildoers and extreme evildoers. Looking at the 5 people who had entered an even more peak state, Lu Feng was laughing crazily. At this moment, his aura had also begun to rise. Finally, the 5 kings of massacre looked at each other and did not care about other people's opinions. They used their final trump card. Supreme Law, Destiny. Supreme Law, Void Cold Orchid. Supreme Law, Change Heaven and Earth. Supreme Law. Supreme Law. The 5 Emperors of Slaughter were all using their supreme techniques. They were going all out. They wanted to use their final blow to prove that their glory had not withered. In the face of all this, Lu Feng also began his final madness. Kill. Let me, at the edge of death, at the abyss of oblivion, make my final breakthrough. I am the Emperor. I am the Emperor. This was the strongest move that Lu Feng had created and condensed. It was the first and only move that appeared in his soul venerable. After comprehending the true Emperor's will and integrating his endless noble destiny with the Emperor's chi, Lu Feng had truly achieved the level of the Emperor's descent and the subjugation of heaven and earth. Void chaos. This was the killing of upheaval stage warrior. The final blow of the 5 Kings of Massacre was comparable to the powerful blow of a mid-stage, upheaval stage warrior. And Lu Feng's blow could even obliterate a low-stage, upheaval stage warrior and severely injure a mid-stage, upheaval stage warrior. This had already exceeded the limit of killing and destruction of 1,000,000 stars. In the void, the collision finally appeared. Faintly, the sky lost its color, and even the void began to tremble. What a powerful killing power! Is this the strength of a high-level warrior? This is the peak of the universe's geniuses. This represents the ultimate power of a high-level warrior in the universe. Crazy, invincible. Give them time. What else can stop them from dominating the era? Countless spectators' emotions were stirred up. Although in the eyes of many, such power was not enough to threaten them at all. But in such an atmosphere, they still could not help but feel the same fear, tremble, and go crazy. Kill! Kill! In the void, the last 5 voices came out. At this moment, the most terrifying collision of the 6. It was the collision of the 5 divine kings, a terrifying illusion of a king or a demon. The sky fell and the earth cracked. This was really the sky falling and the earth cracking. Such an extreme collision fused everything, and the destructive power produced had already reached the destructive power of several million stars. The destructive power of several million stars. That was a power that could smash a fast-moving large comet into powder in the void. If the collision did not take place in the greatest killing ground, then under their feet, everything within a radius of 100,000 miles would be completely shattered and turned into nothingness. But even so, the appearance of this destruction still shocked countless powerhouses. For them, the strength of a martial artist in the upheaval stage warrior was really nothing. But the problem was that the ones who used this power were a group of existences that were not even martial artists. This is the strength of the Kings of Massacre. This is the strength of the Kings of Massacre. They are really too terrifying. The setting of the level was originally to distinguish the realm, but these people completely ignored the existence of the realm. As long as they wanted, anything would be shattered and everything would be broken. This was a truly unparalleled power. In the collision, everyone could see countless voids shattering, and they could see the patterns of fate dissipating. They could see blood splattering. It was like the scene of the end of the world. The ground under their feet was shattered into countless existences. This was once the place where the perfect stage kings of massacre fought. And here, more than one king of massacre was born. The sturdiness of this place was difficult for even those existences that could almost go against the gods to destroy easily. But at this moment, under the collision of these 6 people, a terrifying deep pit with a diameter of 100 meters was blasted out below. Such a scene was really unbelievable. The 5 kings of Massacre had all taken medicinal pills, and they were all existences that had surpassed their strongest realm. Previously, they were only between the peak evolution stage and upheaval stage warriors. After taking the medicinal pills, they finally broke through the shackles and entered the realm of early stage, upheaval stage warriors. And Lu Feng definitely had the strength to suppress an upheaval stage warrior. The collision between them had already become the most extreme collision among high-level warriors. It was already an unimaginable limit. Suddenly, everyone could see the bodies of the 5 young Supremes strangely distorted. They saw their arms being destroyed, their legs broken, and countless sparkling bones appearing. They could see Lu Feng's blood spreading, and 5 large transparent holes appearing in his body. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.